Hello everyone. Before we dive into this journey through the grim darkness of the far future, I'd like to know where you're listening from right now and what time it is for you. Are you settling in for the night, letting the horrors of the 41st millennium lull you into an uneasy sleep? Or perhaps you're waking to these tales, starting your day with the weight of the Imperium pressing down on your shoulders. Drop a comment and let me know. I always love hearing from you, wherever you are in the world, whatever hour finds you seeking refuge in these dark stories. Now let's talk about what it means to be sacrificed to the Emperor of Mankind. Not the glorious death sung about in imperial hymns, not the heroic last stands commemorated in statues and monuments, but the quiet, necessary deaths that happen every single day. Thousands of them. 10,000 souls, some sources say, fed to the golden throne each day just to keep the master of mankind anchored to reality. These are not soldiers. These are not heroes. These are psychers, human beings cursed with the ability to touch the warp, and their sacrifice is as inevitable as it is terrifying. This is the story of one such sacrifice. This is what it's like. You don't choose to be a psyker. That's the first thing you need to understand. It's not a power you seek out, not a gift you're granted, not a blessing you pray for. It simply is. One day you're a normal child on some forgotten world at the edge of the galaxy, and the next day, reality cracks open around you. Maybe you make something move without touching it. Maybe you hear thoughts that aren't your own. Maybe you see things that others can't see, things that shouldn't exist, things that hunger. The awakening is different for everyone, but it always brings fear. Not just your fear, though that comes soon enough, but the fear of everyone around you, your parents, your friends, your neighbours. Suddenly they look at you differently. There's a word they use on most imperial worlds, spoken in hushed tones and accompanied by the sign of the aquila pressed hastily against frightened chests. Witch. That's what you are now. Witch, mutant, freak, abomination. On some worlds, they try to hide you. Your family, if they love you enough or fear the authorities more than they fear you, might attempt to conceal your abilities. They'll keep you locked away, tell you never to use your gifts, never to let anyone see what you can do. They'll pray to the Emperor, endless litanies begging for salvation or forgiveness, as if your very existence is a sin that needs absolving. And perhaps it is, in the eyes of the Imperium. Perhaps it is. But hiding never works. Not really, not for long. The Imperium is vast beyond comprehension, spanning 1,000,000 worlds and countless billions of souls, but its reach is thorough. Every world, no matter how remote, pays its tithes. Men for the Imperial Guard, resources for the war machine, and psychers for the Golden Throne, especially psychers. The Imperium needs psychers, even as it fears and despises them. It needs them desperately, hungrily, the way a dying man needs blood. So they come for you. Sometimes it's the local authorities, planetary defense forces or enforcers who've been trained to spot the signs. Sometimes it's the Adeptus Arbits, the Imperium's iron-fisted law enforcement, who arrive with crackling mauls and merciless eyes. Sometimes, if you're particularly unlucky or particularly powerful, it's the Inquisition itself, those terrible agents of the Emperor's will who see heresy and corruption in every shadow. But most often, eventually, it's the black ships. You'll hear about them long before you see them. Whispers spread through your community like a plague, speaking of the great black vessels that descend from orbit every few years or decades, depending on the world and its psyker population. The League of Black Ships, they're called, officially part of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica, the organization responsible for finding, collecting and training every psyker in the Imperium. The ships arrive without warning, their hulls void black and devoid of decoration save for the seal of the Imperium. They're escorted by things that make your blood run cold even before you understand what they are. The Sisters of Silence. These are the Anathema Psychona, the soulless ones, women born without presence in the warp. To a psyker, their very existence is agony. They're blanks, nulls, pariahs. Whatever name you use, the effect is the same. When they're near, your connection to the warp withers and dies. The voices that whisper at the edges of your consciousness go silent. The power you've been desperately trying to control or hide simply vanishes, leaving you feeling hollow, diminished, less than human. They're clad in black armor, their faces hidden behind featureless masks, and they carry bolt weapons that they will not hesitate to use. When they come for you, resistance is pointless. Not just because they're trained warriors, not just because they're accompanied by armed guards and servo skulls and every instrument of Imperial authority. It's because in their presence, you're not a psyker anymore. You're just a terrified human being stripped of the one thing that made you different, the one thing that made you dangerous. Your family might weep. They probably will. Despite the fear, despite the shame, despite the relief some of them might feel, there's still love there. Most of the time, they know they'll never see you again. Everyone knows what happens to psykers taken by the Black Ships. You're going to Terra, the Holy Throne World, the seat of the Imperium, the dwelling place of the God Emperor himself, and you're never coming back. Some psykers are discovered older, their powers manifesting in adolescence or even adulthood. These are particularly dangerous because they've had time to develop habits, relationships, attachments. They've had time to become people, and that makes the loss more keen. But the Imperium prefers them young. Children are easier to train, easier to indoctrinate, easier to shape into whatever tools the Imperium needs. A child taken at 5 or 6 years old will barely remember their homeworld by the time they reach Terra. They'll know only service, only duty, only the cold equations of survival that govern the Imperium of Man. You're processed quickly after capture, catalogued, numbered, stripped of your name and identity. You're no longer whoever you were. You're a psyker tithe, a resource to be transported and allocated. They test you. Crude measurements of your psychic strength, performed by trained officials who regard you with the same clinical detachment they might show to livestock being evaluated for slaughter. And that's not far from the truth, really. You are livestock in a sense. You're food, fuel for the great engine of the Imperium. They use a scale called the Assignment, a system for classifying psykers based on their abilities. At the lowest end are the Iota and Theta class psykers, barely psychic at all, their powers so weak as to be almost undetectable. Then come the Epsilon, Delta and Gamma grades, increasingly powerful but still manageable. The truly strong are classified as Beta, Alpha, or in the rarest of cases, Alpha Plus. These are the psykers who can level cities with their minds, who can see across star systems, who can tear holes in reality itself. You don't know your classification yet. That will come later, on Terra, after more thorough testing. But even here, in this initial evaluation, they can tell whether you're worth training or whether you're destined for the Golden Throne immediately. The weak ones, the ones whose psychic power is minimal but still present, those are the ones who'll never see the inside of the Scholastia Psychana. the great training facility where psykers are molded into servants of the Imperium. No, the weak ones go straight to the throne, their souls leached away to sustain the Emperor's ravaged, dying body. The irony is not lost on anyone paying attention. The weak, who posed the least danger, are consumed immediately. The strong, who could become demon hosts or cause psychic catastrophes that might kill millions, those are the ones the Imperium tries to train and utilize. It's a calculated risk, a cold arithmetic of utility and danger. The Imperium needs its astropaths for communication across the vast distances between stars. It needs its sanctioned psykers to battle the enemies of mankind. It needs its librarians to guide the Space Marine chapters. And above all, it needs the Astronomicon, the great psychic beacon that allows ships to navigate the warp, powered by a choir of 10,000 psykers whose lives are slowly, inexorably drained away. But it also needs sacrifices for the Emperor himself. The Golden Throne, that ancient and terrible device that keeps the master of mankind's spirit tethered to his broken body, requires constant feeding. Psyker souls, consumed and processed and burned away to keep the galaxy's most powerful being from slipping into true death or true apotheosis. No one's quite sure which would be worse. They tell you that your sacrifice will be noble, that you'll be serving the Emperor directly, giving your life so that humanity might survive. The Imperium is very good at making martyrdom seem glorious. They've had 10,000 years to perfect the propaganda, to craft the narratives that make people accept the unacceptable. Your death, your soul being consumed, will protect humanity from the horrors of the warp. It will allow the Astronomicon to shine, guiding human ships safely through the Immaterium. It will sustain the Emperor, allowing his will to continue shaping the Imperium. And all of that is true. That's the most terrible part. It's all true. The Imperium doesn't lie about the necessity. They can't afford to. The numbers are too stark, the need too desperate. Every day, thousands of psykers are sacrificed. Every day, the black ships depart from thousands of worlds, their holds filled with terrified souls. Every day, Terra receives its shipments of human fuel, and every day that fuel is consumed. It's been happening for 10,000 years, an unbroken chain of sacrifice stretching back to the Horus Heresy, to the day the Emperor was entombed upon the Golden Throne. 10,000 years. How many souls is that? How many millions, billions of psykers have been fed to the Golden Throne? The mind reels trying to comprehend it. Each one was a person, once. Each one had thoughts, dreams, fears, hopes. Each one had a family that mourned them, or at least remembered them, at least for a while. And each one died screaming, their psychic essence torn away and devoured, fuel for a god. But that's later. Right now you're still on your homeworld, or perhaps in orbit above it, waiting to be loaded onto the black ship. You're held in a detention facility, probably underground, surrounded by other psykers in various states of distress. Some are children, too young to understand what's happening, crying for parents who aren't coming. Some are adolescents, bitter and angry, raging against the injustice of it all. Some are adults, resigned or defiant or broken, each dealing with their fate in their own way. The Sisters of Silence are always present. Their terrible soul-crushing aura never abates. You learn to live with it, or rather, you learn to exist despite it. It's like missing a limb, a constant ache where something vital used to be. Your psychic abilities are suppressed, nullified by their mere presence, and you feel less than whole. Some psykers go mad from it, unable to cope with the sudden silence in their minds. The screaming starts in the night sometimes, raw and primal, and it doesn't stop until the guards intervene. You wonder if that will be you, if you'll be the one who breaks, who loses their mind before even leaving the planet. But something in you holds firm, some core of identity or will, or maybe just stubbornness. You'll face whatever comes, not because you're brave necessarily, but because there's no other choice. There's no escape from the black ships, no reprieve from the Emperor's tithe. Your fate was sealed the moment your powers manifested, perhaps even before that, written into your genes by some quirk of evolution or exposure to the warp. The Imperium calls it a curse. They're not wrong. Finally, the day comes. You're herded out of the detention facility, shackled and surrounded by guards, the Sisters of Silence forming a perimeter that makes your soul ache. You're loaded onto bulk transports, Grove vehicles designed for cargo rather than passengers, and taken to the spaceport or shuttle launch site. The black ship waits above, a dark wound against the sky, and smaller craft ferry you up in groups. The ride into orbit is rough, utilitarian. No one cares about your comfort. Your cargo, remember. Valuable cargo perhaps, but cargo nonetheless. The shuttle's hold is crowded, filled with other psychers, all of you silent or weeping or praying. The air smells of fear, sweat and recycled oxygen, and the vibration of the engines is a constant rumble that you feel in your bones. And then you dock with the black ship, and your life as you knew it ends forever. The ship is enormous, a void-faring city designed to hold thousands. Its corridors are dark and cold, lit by flickering lumen strips that cast harsh shadows. The walls are bare metal, marked with high Gothic script and purity seals, prayers to the Emperor warding against corruption. The air is chill, regulated to the minimum necessary for human survival, and the pervasive sense of wrongness is overwhelming. This is a ship designed to transport psychers, and every surface, every bulkhead, every seal is inscribed with wards and nullification runes. The whole vessel is a prison, a mobile cage hurtling through the void. You're taken to the holds deep within the ship, massive chambers filled with thousands of other psychers. The conditions are basic at best, inhumane at worst. There are bunks, thin mattresses on metal frames, stacked floor to ceiling. There are sanitation facilities, minimal and often overwhelmed. There are feeding stations where thin rations are dispensed at regular intervals. And everywhere, there are the Sisters of Silence standing watch, their blank presences beating at your psyche like a hammer. This will be your home for the journey to terror. And that journey could take weeks, months, or even years, depending on where your world lies in relation to the throne world and the vagaries of warp travel. The journey is its own kind of hell. We'll explore that in the next part of this dark tale, the voyage aboard the black ships, the slow crawl across the galaxy toward the heart of the Imperium. But for now, this is where we leave you, newly captured, newly imprisoned, your old life gone and your new fate uncertain. You know only that you're going to terror, and that most who go there do not return. Sleep well if you can. The nightmares are only beginning. The journey through darkness. Life aboard the black ships. Time loses meaning aboard the black ships. There are no windows in the holds where you're kept. No view of the void outside. No way to track the passage of days except by the regularity of meal distribution and the sleep cycles that your exhausted body demands. The lumens never fully dim, maintaining a constant twilight that makes true rest nearly impossible. You exist in a state of perpetual semi-wakefulness, aware but not fully conscious, present but disconnected. The holds are overcrowded. Thousands of psychers, perhaps tens of thousands depending on the size of the ship and how many worlds it's already visited, packed into spaces designed more for cargo than for living beings. The bunks are stacked 6 or 7 high, barely enough room between them to sit up. Personal space is a luxury that no longer exists. You're surrounded constantly by others, their bodies pressed close, their fear and despair a palpable miasma in the recycled air. You learn quickly that there are hierarchies even here among the condemned. The stronger psychers, those whose power is evident even through the nullification aura of the Sisters of Silence, command a sort of respect or fear from the others. They often claim the lower bunks, the ones you don't need to climb to reach, the ones with marginally more space. The weak cluster together for comfort or protection, though from what you're not entirely sure. Everyone here shares the same fate after all. What does it matter if you're strong or weak when you're all bound for the same destination? Some of the psychers aboard have been on the ship for a very long time. The black ships don't travel directly from Collection World to Terra. No, they follow routes, circuits that take them to dozens or even hundreds of worlds, before finally returning to the throne world with their holds full. You meet one man, old before his time, who's been aboard for 3 years. 3 years in this hell, collected from a world near the eastern fringe, watching as the ship stopped at world after world, taking on more and more psychers, the holds growing ever more crowded. He's half mad, this old psycher. He whispers to himself constantly, prayers to the Emperor mixed with what sound like equations or formulas, as if he's trying to calculate something, work out some problem that only he can see. His eyes are glassy, unfocused, and he flinches at sounds that no one else can hear. You wonder if the extended exposure to the Sisters of Silence has broken something fundamental in him, if being cut off from the warp for so long has damaged his psyche beyond repair. You wonder if that will happen to you given enough time. The Sisters of Silence rotate through the holds on regular patrols, their armoured boots echoing on the metal deck plates. They never speak, of course. They're silent by vow and by nature, communication handled through sign language that only they and their handlers understand. But they don't need to speak to maintain order. Their very presence is enough. When they approach, conversations die, movement stills, everyone trying to make themselves as small and unnoticeable as possible. It's instinctive, primal, the reaction of prey hoping the predator will pass them by. But these predators aren't interested in you. Not as individuals anyway. They're here to guard, to ensure that no psyker tries to use their powers, that no desperate soul attempts escape or violence. And they're here to prevent the worst possibility, the nightmare scenario that every ship carrying psychers must prepare for. Possession, even with the nullification aura of the Sisters, even with the wards carved into every surface, even with constant vigilance, the danger is always present. Psychers are conduits to the warp, connections to that realm of madness and horror that lies beneath reality. And the warp is full of things that hunger, entities that would love nothing more than to force their way into the material universe through the weak point that a psyker represents. Demonic possession is the great fear, the terror that haunts every moment aboard the black ships. If even one psyker is possessed, if a demon manages to claw its way through, the entire ship could be compromised. Thousands would die, maybe tens of thousands. The ship itself might be lost, consumed by warp-spawned horror, or transformed into something that would need to be destroyed on sight. So the sisters watch. They watch constantly, tirelessly, their blank souls serving as bulwarks against the insidious whispers of chaos. And if they suspect, even for a moment, that a psyker is becoming dangerous, if they see signs of possession or corruption, they act immediately and without mercy. Bolt rounds at close range, the psyker's body torn apart before whatever's trying to come through can establish a foothold. You witness an execution during the voyage. Everyone does. They make sure of it, a reminder of what happens to those who lose control or give in to temptation. A young girl, maybe 13 or 14 years old, starts screaming in the middle of a sleep cycle. Her voice is wrong, layered, multiple tones speaking in harmony and discord simultaneously. Her eyes roll back in her head, showing only whites, and her body begins to contort in ways that human bodies shouldn't bend. There's a smell, sudden and overwhelming like burning copper and rotting flowers, a scent that makes your stomach heave and your skin crawl. The sisters are there within seconds, 3 of them moving with frightening speed and precision. They don't hesitate, don't attempt to subdue or restrain. Their bolt pistols come up in perfect unison, and the girl's body explodes in a spray of blood and bone and something else. Something that writhes and screams in a voice that isn't sound, but somehow you hear it anyway. Feel it scraping against the inside of your skull. And then it's over. The girl is dead, her remains scattered across the deck, and servitors emerge from hatches in the walls to clean up the mess with mechanical efficiency. The sisters stand watch until the servitors finish, then move on to continue their patrol as if nothing happened. The other psychers huddle in their bunks, silent, shaking, traumatized by what they've just witnessed. No one speaks of it afterward. What is there to say? The fear of possession becomes a constant companion, a weight that presses down on your thoughts. You monitor yourself obsessively, checking for signs of corruption, any indication that something might be trying to get inside your head. Every stray thought, every moment of disorientation, every strange dream becomes potential evidence of demonic influence. The paranoia is exhausting, but you can't stop. None of you can. And the dreams, oh, the dreams are terrible. Even cut off from the warp by the Sisters of Silence, even in this cold iron ship warded against psychic phenomenon, you still dream. And your dreams are full of whispers, of promises, of things that want desperately to be let in. You see visions of impossible geometries, of colours that don't exist, of beings vast and terrible and beautiful and wrong. You hear voices offering power, freedom, revenge against those who've condemned you to this fate. Some psychers listen to those voices, not many but some. You can see it in their eyes, a change that happens gradually or sometimes all at once. A hardness, a distance, a hunger that wasn't there before. These are the ones the sisters watch most carefully, and these are the ones who often end up as bloodstains on the deck plates. You survive by keeping your head down, by not drawing attention, by maintaining the fragile barrier between yourself and the warp. It's harder than it sounds. The isolation, the fear, the crushing despair of your situation, all of it wears away at your defenses, at your will to resist. You understand why some choose to give in, to accept what the warp offers. At least it would be quick. At least it would be a choice of sorts, in a situation where you have no choices at all. But something in you holds firm. Maybe it's survival instinct. Maybe it's stubbornness. Maybe it's the tiny, desperate hope that your fate might be something other than immediate death. that you might be strong enough or useful enough to be trained rather than consumed. The ship travels through the warp, of course. There's no other way to cross the vast distances between stars in any reasonable time frame. But warp travel aboard a black ship is different from travel aboard a normal vessel. The Geller field, the protective barrier that keeps the ship safe from the horrors of the Imperium, is reinforced, layered, redundant. The navigators who guide the ship are among the most skilled in the Imperium, chosen specifically for their ability to resist corruption and maintain course through the storm. Even so, you feel it when the ship enters the warp. There's a moment of discontinuity, a sensation like falling and flying simultaneously, a twist in your gut that's as much psychic as physical. The constant background wrongness that you've been living with intensifies, becomes sharp, immediate. For a moment, just a brief instant, you feel the warp around you, an ocean of screaming souls and predatory attention, all of it pressing against the ship's hull like water pressure at crushing depths. And then the sister's presence reasserts itself, and the connection is severed, and you're left gasping and shaking, cold sweat dripping down your spine. All around you, other psychers are having similar reactions, some worse. The moaning and crying that follows each warp transition lasts for hours, a chorus of psychic trauma that the guards and sisters ignore completely. They've seen it all before. They'll see it again on the next transition, and the next, and the next. How many transitions does a voyage to Terra require? It depends on the route, on the conditions in the warp, on 1,000 variables that you have no way of knowing. The ship might translate in and out of the warp dozens of times, each transition a fresh agony. Real space offers no comfort either, just a different kind of emptiness, the cold void between stars where you're equally trapped and helpless. Meals aboard the black ship are basic sustenance, nothing more. Thin gruel, protein blocks that taste of nothing, water that's been recycled so many times it carries a metallic tang. It's enough to keep you alive, barely enough to keep you functional. The Imperium doesn't waste resources on those destined for sacrifice, and even those destined for training receive only the minimum necessary. You lose weight during the voyage, your body consuming itself slowly, muscle turning to fat, turning to nothing. Some psychers refuse to eat, a form of slow suicide. The guards don't force them. Why would they? One more or less makes little difference when you're transporting thousands. The bodies are removed when they're found, taken away to be processed into something useful probably. The Imperium wastes nothing, not even corpses. Others eat too much, hoarding rations, stealing from those too weak or too apathetic to resist. Small wars break out over food, brief savage struggles that the guards only intervene in if someone is killed. A few broken bones, some blood spilled. That's acceptable, normal even. These are desperate people in desperate circumstances, and the veneer of civilization is thin at best. You fall somewhere in the middle, eating what you're given, neither hoarding nor starving. You're in survival mode, every day a test of endurance, every moment a small victory just by continuing to exist. There are no amenities aboard the black ship, no entertainment, no distractions. Some psychers talk to pass the time, sharing stories of their homeworlds, their lives before capture. You hear tales of 1,000 different worlds, each unique, each with its own culture and customs and ways of life, all of them ultimately subsumed into the vast machinery of the Imperium. Hive worlds and agri-worlds, forge worlds and paradise worlds, death worlds where every day is a struggle, and pleasure worlds where every desire can be fulfilled. None of it matters now. Everyone here is the same, stripped of context, reduced to the single defining characteristic of their psychic curse. You're not people with histories and futures, you're psychers, and that's all you are, all you'll ever be in the eyes of the Imperium. Some form bonds, friendships, or something like them, connections forged in shared suffering. You watch people find comfort in each other, physical or emotional, brief moments of human warmth in the cold metal hell of the ship. The guards don't prevent it. Again, why would they? Let the condemned find what solace they can in the time they have left. You don't form those bonds. You can't. Something in you won't allow that vulnerability, that attachment. You've already lost everyone you ever cared about. You're not interested in finding new people to lose, so you remain apart, not hostile but distant, a solitary soul in a sea of suffering. The old psyker who's been aboard for 3 years dies one night. You wake to find him cold and still in his bunk, his eyes open and staring at nothing, his mouth frozen in what might be a smile or might be a grimace. No one knows his name, no one mourns him, and the servitors take his body away within the hour. You inherit his bunk, slightly lower and slightly more spacious than your previous one. It feels like winning some terrible lottery. Months pass, or maybe weeks, or maybe years. The timelessness becomes absolute, each day identical to the last, a grey eternity of fear and boredom and dull despair. You forget what your homeworld looked like. You forget the faces of your family. You forget what it felt like to use your powers freely, without the crushing weight of the sisters' presence. You're being hollowed out, your identity slowly eroded by the relentless monotony and horror of the voyage. And then finally the ship arrives at Terra. You don't know it at first. There's no announcement, no indication that anything has changed. But the older psychers, those who've been aboard longest, sense something. There's a stirring, a change in the routine. The sisters become more numerous, their patrols more frequent. The ship's engines change pitch, the background hum shifting to something different, maybe the sound of orbital maneuvering, and then you feel it. Even through the sisters' nullification, even through all the wards and barriers, you feel it. A presence, vast and terrible and golden, a psychic weight that presses down on the ship like the hand of a god. The Emperor. You're feeling the Emperor's psychic presence, radiating from Terra like a star, blazing so bright that even the sisters' blank souls can't completely block it out. Some psychers begin to weep, overwhelmed by the proximity to the being they've been raised to worship. Some begin to pray, endless litanies of devotion and fear. Some simply stare at nothing, their minds unable to process what they're feeling. You feel something different. Not awe, not devotion, but recognition. That presence, that golden light, is hungry. It's dying, and it's starving, and you're food. You and every other psyker aboard this ship and all the other black ships arriving at Terra, you're all cattle being delivered to the slaughterhouse. The ship docks, probably at the Lionsgate spaceport, one of the massive orbital facilities connected to the Imperial Palace. You're kept in the holds for hours, maybe days, while processing begins. You hear activity outside, the sounds of equipment moving, voices shouting commands, the rhythmic clanging of bulk cargo being transferred, and then they come for you. Guards and sisters, moving through the holds in organized groups, dividing the psychers into smaller clusters for transport planetside. You're herded like animals, which is accurate enough, pushed and pulled and shoved into transport containers that reek of fear, sweat, and desperation. The container is sealed, leaving you in darkness, and you feel the motion as you're moved, loaded onto shuttles, prepared for descent to the surface. This is it. You're going to Terra. You're going to the throne world, to the heart of the Imperium, to the dwelling place of the God Emperor of mankind. And somewhere deep inside the Imperial Palace, in a chamber sealed away from all light and hope, the Golden Throne waits for you, hungry and patient and inevitable. The descent begins, and you close your eyes, and you pray. Not to the Emperor, because what would be the point? He's the one who's going to consume you. No, you pray to nothing, to the universe, to whatever might be listening. You pray for it to be quick. You pray for it to be over soon. You pray for an end to the fear and the uncertainty and the waiting. Terror awaits, and with it, your final fate. Arrival at the throne world, first glimpses of Terra. The shuttle breaks through Terra's atmosphere with a violence that rattles your teeth and turns your stomach. You're still sealed in the transport container, unable to see, but you feel everything. The buffeting of atmospheric entry, the G-forces pressing you against the metal walls, the heat seeping through the hull as friction burns away the void cold. Some of the psychers in your container are sick, vomiting thin bile that they haven't got food enough in their stomachs to produce. The smell in the confined space becomes unbearable quickly, but there's nothing to be done about it. You endure because you have no choice. The descent seems to take forever, but eventually the shuttle's motion smooths, the violence giving way to controlled flight. You're in atmosphere now, in Terra's air, breathing air that billions have breathed before you across 10,000 years of Imperial history. The thought should be profound, meaningful, but mostly you're just terrified. The fear you've been living with for weeks or months now crystallizing into something sharp and immediate. When they finally open the transport container, the light is blinding. You squint against it, your eyes watering after so long in darkness, and hands grab you roughly, pulling you out onto a loading dock. The air is different here, less processed than aboard the ship, carrying strange smells, incense and chemical cleaners, and beneath it all, the acrid scent of too many people living too close together. You're on Terra, you realize. You're actually standing on the throne world. You don't get time to appreciate it. The guards are efficient, professional, herding the disoriented psychers into lines with practiced ease. The Sisters of Silence are omnipresent, their blank auras creating zones of null space that make you feel physically ill. But there's something different here, a background sensation that wasn't present aboard the ship. That golden presence, the Emperor's psychic radiance, is stronger here. So much stronger. It's like standing near a sun, feeling the heat on your face, knowing that looking directly at it would burn out your eyes. Some psychers collapse immediately, overwhelmed by the proximity to such vast psychic power. The guards drag them aside, sorting them into a separate group. You force yourself to stay upright, to keep moving, some survival instinct telling you that falling now would be very, very bad. You pass the first test without even realizing there was a test. The loading dock is vast, a cathedral space of metal and stone with ceilings lost in shadows far above. Gothic architecture dominates everything. Massive pillars carved with scenes of imperial triumph, vaulted arches adorned with purity seals and prayer scrolls, walls covered in high Gothic script proclaiming the Emperor's glory. Everything is old here, ancient, maintained and preserved for millennia. This is Terra, cradle of humanity, and the weight of history presses down as surely as the Emperor's psychic presence. You're marched through corridors, Wide boulevards, really, designed to accommodate massive crowds. The scale is inhuman, designed to make people feel small and insignificant before the majesty of the Imperium. Servo skulls drift overhead, their augmetic eyes tracking your procession, recording everything for some archive that probably no one will ever review. The walls are lined with statues, heroes of the Imperium frozen in marble and bronze, their blank stone eyes judging you as you pass. And everywhere, there are other people. Not psychers, you can tell the difference now, have become sensitive to the subtle wrongness that your kind carries, but normal humans. Billions of them live and work within the Imperial Palace complex, you've been told. Adepts and functionaries, servants and soldiers, the vast bureaucratic machinery that runs an empire spanning 1,000,000 worlds. They don't look at you directly, these normal humans. They've learned not to. Looking at psychers too long, acknowledging their existence too openly, it's considered bad luck. You're necessary, but you're not welcome. The procession winds through the palace complex and you catch glimpses of the world beyond through massive windows and open courtyards. Terror. Holy terror. What you see doesn't match the propaganda, the images of paradise you've been shown all your life. The sky is brown, choked with pollution from uncounted industries. The air is thick, heavy, carrying particulates that make you cough despite the filters built into the palace's ventilation systems. Beyond the palace walls you can see the sprawl of the hive cities, massive urban towers stretching to the horizon in every direction. Billions upon billions of souls packed into structures that blot out the land beneath. Terra is an ecumenopolis, a world city, every square metre developed and redeveloped until the original surface is buried beneath kilometres of construction. There's no nature here, no green, no growing things. Everything organic has been long since consumed, replaced by metal and rockcrete and plasteel. You think of your homeworld, whatever world that was, and feel a pang of loss for skies that were actually blue, for Earth that wasn't buried beneath endless construction, for spaces where you could see to the horizon without steel towers blocking the view. But Terra is sacred, you remind yourself. This is the birthplace of humanity, the seat of the Emperor, the most holy world in all the Imperium. The environmental devastation is a small price to pay for the centralization of power, for the ability to coordinate an empire spanning the galaxy. At least that's what the ecclesiarchy teaches. You're not entirely convinced, but then, no one asked your opinion. The group is taken to a processing centre, a massive complex of halls and chambers designed to evaluate and sort the constant influx of psychers. This is where your fate will be determined, where the tests will decide whether you're strong enough to be trained or weak enough to be consumed immediately. The tension is palpable, every psyker in the group radiating fear and desperate hope in equal measure. You're stripped, examined, catalogued. Medici servitors scan your body, recording every detail, checking for mutation or disease or hidden augmetics. Lex mechanics ask questions in flat, emotionless voices, recording your responses to add to your file. Where were you born? What was your homeworld's designation? When did your powers first manifest? Have you ever used your abilities intentionally? Have you ever heard voices in your mind? Have you ever dreamed of places you've never been? You answer honestly, mostly. What would be the point of lying? They probably already know the answers anyway, pulled from records transmitted ahead by the Black Ship. The interview is less about gathering information, and more about establishing a baseline, observing your responses, looking for signs of instability or corruption. Then come the proper tests. You're taken to a chamber, stark and cold, where a figure waits behind a psychically shielded barrier. An evaluator, a trained psyker whose job is to measure the strength and nature of your abilities. For the first time since you were captured, the Sisters of Silence withdraw, their presence replaced by wards and technological null fields. It's not the same, not nearly as absolute, and you feel your connection to the warp return like blood flow to a limb that's been asleep. The sensation is agonizing and euphoric simultaneously, overwhelming after so long cut off. Demonstrate your ability, the evaluator commands, their voice distorted by the barrier. Reach out with your mind. Let me see what you can do. You hesitate. You've spent so long suppressing your powers, hiding them, terrified of what they might attract. The idea of using them deliberately here of all places feels dangerous beyond measure. But there's no choice. This is the test. This is how they'll determine your classification on the assignment scale, whether you're alpha or beta or gamma or something lower, something weaker, something destined for immediate consumption. So you reach out. Carefully, cautiously, you extend your psychic senses into the space around you. The warp responds immediately, eager, hungry, a vast ocean of power pressing against the fragile barrier of your will. You touch it lightly, letting just a trickle of energy flow through you, manifesting as a simple telekinetic push against a test object placed in the center of the room. The object moves, sliding across the floor, and you pull back quickly, terrified of drawing too much, of losing control. Again, the evaluator says, stronger this time, show me your limits. You go deeper, pulling more power, and the warp surges through you like a current, like touching a live wire. The test object lifts into the air, spinning, and you feel the connection widening, threatening to overwhelm you. There are things in the warp you realize with sudden horror, things watching, things interested in the bright point of psychic light that you've become, things with teeth and hunger and malign intelligence. You slam your mental barriers shut, cutting off the flow, and the test object crashes to the floor. You're gasping, shaking, cold sweat soaking through the thin shift they've dressed you in. Interesting, the evaluator says, making notes on a data slate. You have power, moderate level, but your control is poor. Fear limits you. That could be trained, or it could be your downfall. We'll see. More tests follow. They probe your mind, looking for weaknesses, for cracks where corruption might enter. They show you symbols and watch for reactions, trying to detect if you've been exposed to chaos iconography, if anything has already gotten its hooks into your psyche. They ask you to perform specific tasks, minor telekinesis, surface telepathy, precognitive glimpses, measuring your versatility and skill. You do your best, walking a knife's edge between showing enough power to be valuable and not so much power that you lose control. It's exhausting, draining, every test leaving you weaker, more vulnerable. But you survive them. You pass, provisionally, tentatively. You're not so weak that immediate sacrifice is necessary. There's potential here, raw and undisciplined, but potential nonetheless. The evaluator makes their final notes and dismisses you. You'll be sent to the Scholastia Psychona for training, they say. Whether you survive that training is up to you. Most don't. Those who fail either die in the attempt or are sacrificed to the Emperor. Either way, your service to the Imperium is assured. You're not sure whether to feel relieved or more terrified. You've been granted a reprieve, a chance, but it's a chance to enter another hell, a training program designed to break you and rebuild you into something the Imperium can use. And if you break incorrectly, if you fail to become what they need, the Golden Throne still waits. But that's later. For now, you're taken to temporary quarters, a vast dormitory filled with hundreds of other psychers who've passed the initial evaluation. The conditions are marginally better than aboard the Black Ship. Actual mattresses on the bunks, slightly more food, sanitation facilities that work properly. It's a small mercy, but you're grateful for it nonetheless. You lie on your assigned bunk staring at the ceiling, feeling the Emperor's presence like a weight on your chest. He's close, so close. Somewhere in this massive complex, in chambers sealed away from all light, the Master of Mankind sits upon the Golden Throne, his ravaged body sustained by the daily sacrifice of thousands of souls just like yours. You've been taught to revere him all your life. Every Imperial citizen is raised with prayers to the Emperor, with hymns proclaiming his glory, with the absolute certainty that he watches over humanity from the Golden Throne. He's a god, the propaganda says. He's eternal, perfect, all-knowing, all-seeing. But now, feeling his presence directly for the first time, you're not sure what he is. There's power there, yes, vast and terrible and almost incomprehensible. But there's also pain, endless suffering, a soul stretched thin across 10,000 years of agony. There's hunger, desperate and overwhelming, the need of a dying thing that consumes everything around it just to continue existing. Is he still human, you wonder? Was he ever? Or has he become something else? Something beyond human categories of existence? Something that wears the shape of humanity like a mask while being fundamentally other? You don't know. You'll probably never know. These are questions above your station, thoughts that might be considered heretical if voiced aloud. You're just a psyker, a resource to be utilized and eventually consumed. Your thoughts don't matter. Your questions don't matter. Only your service matters, and your service has been predetermined from the moment your powers manifested. Sleep comes eventually, fitful and plagued by nightmares. You dream of golden light and consuming fire, of vast hands reaching for you, of your soul being pulled apart and scattered to the winds. You wake gasping, disoriented, and for a moment you can't remember where you are. Then it comes back. Terror, the Imperial Palace, the processing center, and you realize that the nightmares might be prophetic. Tomorrow you'll begin training at the Scholastia Psychona. Tomorrow the real test begins, but tonight, for just a few hours, you're alive and intact and still yourself. You hold on to that, a small comfort in the face of what's coming. Outside the dormitory, terror continues its endless churn, billions of lives intersecting and diverging, the vast machinery of the Imperium grinding forward with relentless, inexorable momentum. And at the heart of it all, on the Golden Throne, the Emperor waits, hungry and patient, knowing that eventually all psychers come to him. Eventually you will too. The Astronomicon and the Emperor's hunger, understanding the need. Before we go further into your personal journey, we need to understand why any of this is necessary. Why does the Imperium sacrifice thousands of psychers every day? Why is this tremendous cost in human lives considered not just acceptable, but essential? To answer that, we need to talk about the Astronomicon and the Golden Throne, the two great consumers of psyker souls. The Imperium spans 1,000,000 worlds, scattered across the entire galaxy. Think about that for a moment. 1,000,000 worlds, each separated by vast gulfs of space, empty light years where nothing exists but void and the occasional wandering asteroid. How does such an empire function? How does Terra communicate with frontier worlds on the other side of the galaxy? How do armies and resources move between systems? How does the vast machine of Imperial authority maintain its grip across such impossible distances? The answer is the warp. The warp, the Immersive, the Sea of Souls. It has many names, all of them inadequate to describe what it actually is. It's a parallel dimension, a realm of pure psychic energy that underlies reality like an ocean beneath a thin sheet of ice. In the warp, the normal laws of physics don't apply. Distance and time are fluid, meaningless concepts. A ship entering the warp can cross in days what would take millennia in real space. It's the only practical method of faster-than-light travel available to the Imperium, the key to everything they've built. But the warp is dangerous. Terribly, lethally dangerous. It's not empty space. It's not a simple void that ships can cross safely. It's a realm of madness and horror, home to entities that hunger for human souls, to demons and worse things, to the chaos gods themselves in their terrible domains. Ships travelling through the warp are protected by Geller fields, bubbles of reality that keep the warp's denizens at bay, but even with those protections, warp travel is perilous, and navigation is nearly impossible. There are no stars in the warp, no landmarks, no fixed points by which to chart a course. The currents of the Immersive shift constantly. Warp storms rise and fall, entire regions become impassable without warning. A ship entering the warp might emerge days later, having travelled thousands of light years, or it might emerge centuries later, having gone nowhere, or it might never emerge at all, lost forever in the shifting madness. This is where the Astronomicon comes in. The Astronomicon is a psychic beacon, a lighthouse in the storm, a fixed point in the chaos of the warp. It shines from Terra with the light of 10,000 suns, a golden radiance that can be perceived by navigators across vast stretches of the galaxy. Ships use it to orient themselves, to chart courses, to find their way through the madness. Without the Astronomicon, interstellar travel would be limited to short, uncertain jumps, making the Imperium as we know it impossible to maintain. The Astronomicon has been burning for 10,000 years since the time of the Horus Heresy, an unbroken beam of psychic light that never wavers, never fades. It's often called the most important single installation in the entire Imperium, and that's not hyperbole. If the Astronomicon were to go dark, the Imperium would be severed, cut into isolated fragments that could never reunite. The great enterprise of human expansion across the galaxy would collapse within generations. So how does the Astronomicon work? How is such tremendous psychic power generated and sustained? The answer is the choir, 10,000 psychers, working in unison, pooling their psychic strength to create the beacon. They're housed in the Forbidden Fortress on Terra, in a great spherical chamber at the heart of the complex, connected to strange apparatus that channels and focuses their power. These are the chosen of the Adeptus Astronomica, psychers who've undergone years of training to prepare for this ultimate service. They wear yellow robes and scarlet badges, their heads shaven, their bodies augmented with neural implants that link them to the machinery. They're inducted into the choir in a ceremony that's considered a great honour, the pinnacle of a psycher's service to the Imperium. They enter the chamber willingly, proudly, knowing the value of what they're about to do, and then the machinery activates and their life force begins to drain away. The process is gradual but inexorable. The psychers in the choir pour their strength into the Astronomicon, their psychic energy channeled through the apparatus and transmitted across the galaxy. It's beyond exhausting, it's consuming. Day by day, hour by hour, their souls are burned away, their very essence transformed into light. 100 psykers die every single day serving in the Astronomican choir. Think about that number. Every day, 100 souls are completely consumed, used up, their life force depleted to nothing. Their bodies are removed from the spherical chamber, withered husks that barely resemble human beings anymore, and new psykers are cycled in to take their places. The average psyker serving in the choir lasts 2 to 3 months. Some particularly strong individuals might last longer, but not much. The drain is constant, unrelenting, a spiritual hemorrhage that can't be stopped or slowed. From the moment you enter the choir, you're dying, and there's no way to survive it. 36,500 psykers per year, just for the Astronomican, every year, for 10,000 years. The numbers become meaningless at that scale, too large to comprehend as individual tragedies. They're just statistics, resources consumed in the service of the Imperium's continued function. But the Astronomican, terrible as it is only half the equation. There's another consumer of psyker souls, one even more voracious, even more necessary. The Emperor himself. We need to talk about what the Emperor actually is at this point in history. The propaganda paints him as a living god, eternal and unchanging, watching over humanity from the Golden Throne. That's not entirely untrue, but it's not the whole truth either. The Emperor was mortally wounded during the Horus Heresy, struck down by his most beloved son, the War Master Horus, in the final confrontation aboard Horus's battle barge. The Emperor won that battle, destroying Horus utterly, but the cost was terrible. His body was broken, ravaged beyond any hope of natural healing. He was interred upon the Golden Throne, an ancient device of terrible power, the only thing capable of sustaining what remained of his life. For 10,000 years, the Emperor has sat upon the Golden Throne. His body is a withered, skeletal thing, barely recognizable as human, kept alive through technology and psychic force. His mind, his soul, is something else entirely, vast beyond comprehension, stretched thin across the entire galaxy, sustaining the Astronomican, fighting a never-ending war against the forces of chaos that would love to see humanity fall. But even the Emperor's tremendous power has limits. His body is dying, has been dying for millennia, and it requires constant sustenance to prevent total collapse. Not food, not water, not any normal sustenance. It requires souls. Specifically, it requires psyker souls, human psychic essences that can be consumed and converted into the energy needed to keep the Emperor anchored to reality. Every day, thousands of psykers are brought before the Golden Throne. The numbers vary depending on the source and the era, but most estimates put it at between 1,000 and 4,000 per day. By the late M36, the 36th millennium, the requirement had increased fourfold from earlier periods, suggesting that the Emperor's condition is deteriorating, his need growing more desperate with each passing century. Think about what that means. 4,000 psykers per day, each one a human being with thoughts and feelings and a life that's being ended. 4,000 souls consumed, burned away to sustain a single existence. 1.46 million per year. Across 10,000 years, that's more than 14 billion souls sacrificed to the Golden Throne. 14 billion. The number is so vast as to be almost meaningless, but try to imagine it. Every one of those billions was a person like you, someone who manifested psychic abilities and was collected by the black ships and brought to Terra and led before the Emperor to die. 14 billion individual tragedies, 14 billion lives cut short, 14 billion families left mourning. And it's necessary. That's the horror of it. It's not cruelty for cruelty's sake, not waste for no purpose. It's survival. Without those sacrifices, the Emperor would die, or worse. His spirit would dissipate or be consumed by chaos, and either outcome would be catastrophic for the Imperium. The Emperor serves multiple functions in his current state. He sustains the Astronomicon, his psychic might channeled through the choir to create the beacon that guides ships across the galaxy. He holds closed a breach in the webway deep beneath the Imperial Palace, a tear in reality caused during the Horus Heresy, preventing hordes of demons from pouring into the heart of the Imperium. His will extends across the galaxy, a psychic presence that wards against chaos and sustains the faith of billions. If he were to die, all of that would stop. The Astronomicon would go dark, the webway breach would open, probably destroying Terra and possibly much more. The Imperium would lose its spiritual anchor, its godhead, the figure around which 10,000 years of faith and tradition have been built. The collapse would be total, immediate, catastrophic, so the sacrifices continue. Every day the black ships arrive. Every day psychers are tested and sorted. Every day thousands are led into the deepest chambers of the Imperial Palace, into the Imperial dungeon where the Golden Throne resides, and there they die. Not heroically, not gloriously, but necessarily. They die so that the Emperor can continue existing, so that the Imperium can continue functioning, so that humanity can survive one more day in a galaxy that wants nothing more than to see it extinct. You understand now, or at least you're beginning to. This is your fate, or it could be. You might be trained, moulded into an astropath or a sanctioned psyker, given years of service before your eventual death. Or you might be judged too weak for training, your psychic strength insufficient for anything except immediate consumption. Or you might succeed in your training only to be inducted into the Astronomicon choir, your life measured in weeks rather than years, but eventually, one way or another, the Emperor will consume you. That's the ultimate destination for all psychers in the Imperium. Whether you go to the Golden Throne directly or serve first in other capacities, whether you die tomorrow or in 50 years, your soul is already claimed. The moment your powers manifested, the moment the Imperium identified you as a psyker, your fate was sealed. It's a grim realization, lying there in your bunk in the dormitory, feeling the Emperor's presence pressing down like a physical weight. You're not a person anymore, not really. You're a resource, fuel for the great machine, a tiny component in a system so vast that your individual existence means nothing. The Imperium measures psychers in units, allocations, tithes. You're not you in any meaningful sense. You're one of 4,000 units to be consumed today, or tomorrow, or whenever your number comes up. The other psychers in the dormitory are silent, most lost in their own thoughts. You wonder what they're thinking, whether they've come to the same conclusions. Do they understand what awaits them? Do they still harbour hope that they'll be the exception, the one who survives training and earns a life of service rather than immediate death? Or have they accepted it, resigned themselves to the inevitable? You don't know. You can't tell. Everyone wears their fear differently, processes their fate in their own way. Some pray constantly, endless litanies to the Emperor begging for mercy that probably won't come. Some withdraw into themselves, becoming almost catatonic. Some rage, cursing the Imperium and the Emperor and the unfairness of it all, though they do so quietly, careful not to attract the attention of the guards. You fall somewhere in the middle, neither accepting nor rejecting, just existing in a state of numb awareness. This is your reality now. This is what your life has become, and tomorrow, training begins at the Scholastia Psychana, where you'll either prove yourself valuable enough to delay your consumption or fail and be sent immediately to the Golden Throne. The stakes couldn't be clearer. The Imperium needs psychers desperately, but it also consumes them voraciously. You're caught between those two imperatives, a resource that must be exploited and a sacrifice that must be made. Your only hope is to prove that exploiting you yields more value than consuming you, that your service alive outweighs the energy your soul could provide. It's not much of a hope, but it's all you have. Outside, terror continues its endless cycle. The Astronomicon shines, powered by the dying souls in the choir. The Emperor sits upon the Golden Throne, consuming the psychers brought before him. The black ships traverse the galaxy, collecting more fuel for the fires, and billions of normal humans go about their lives, ignorant or uncaring about the tremendous cost in souls required to maintain the Imperium they take for granted. You're one of those costs. You always have been, from the moment your psychic potential was written into your genes. The only question now is how much value you can provide before the final bill comes due. The answer to that question begins tomorrow in the halls of the Scholastia Psychana, where psychers are forged into tools or broken into components, where the strong are shaped and the weak are discarded, where your fate will finally, irrevocably be determined. Sleep if you can. The test of your life begins at dawn. The Scholastia Psychana, Trials of Mind and Soul. Dawn comes early at the Scholastia Psychana. If dawn even means anything in the windowless depths of the Imperial Palace, where the training facility is housed. You're woken by harsh klaxons, the kind of sound designed to cut through sleep and shock you into immediate alertness. Around you, hundreds of other psychers stir, climbing from their bunks with varying degrees of reluctance and fear. You're given exactly 10 minutes to use the sanitation facilities, another 10 to consume the morning meal. More of the same thin gruel and protein blocks you've grown grimly accustomed to, and then you're herded into formation in a vast assembly hall. The space is deliberately intimidating, with vaulted ceilings lost in shadow and walls covered in scrolls bearing the names of psychers who've passed through the Scholastia over the millennia. You wonder how many of those names represent psychers who survived their training, and how many simply mark those who died here rather than at the Golden Throne. The ratio is probably not comforting. A figure appears on a raised platform at the hall's far end. They're dressed in robes of deep blue, the colour of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica, and their presence carries the unmistakable weight of psychic power carefully controlled. This is an instructor, one of the psychers who've survived the training themselves and been selected to pass on their knowledge to the next generation of the condemned. You are here because you possess psychic abilities, the instructor begins, their voice amplified by clever acoustics so that every word echoes through the hall. In the eyes of the Imperium, this makes you dangerous. You are openings through which the warp might pour, cracks in reality through which demons might enter. Left untrained, left wild, every one of you is a potential catastrophe waiting to happen. There's no comfort in these words, no welcome, no suggestion that you're anything other than threats to be managed. The Scholastia Psychana exists for two purposes, the instructor continues. First, to identify those psychers whose power and strength of character make them suitable for service to the Imperium. Second, to ensure that those unsuitable for service are disposed of in a manner that benefits the Emperor and mankind. You will be tested extensively, pushed to your absolute limits, broken down and rebuilt. Some of you will succeed, most will not. Either way, you will serve. The assembled psykers are silent, the weight of those words settling over the crowd like a shroud. You will serve, one way or another, whether alive or dead, functional or consumed. You will provide value to the Imperium. There's no escape, no alternative, no third option where you're simply released and allowed to live a normal life. Your training begins now, the instructor says. May the Emperor have mercy on your souls, because we will not. You're divided into groups, sorted by the initial evaluations you underwent upon arrival. The stronger psykers, those classified as Gamma or above, are separated from the weaker ones. You find yourself in a middle group, neither the most powerful nor the least, which you suppose is a mercy of sorts. The very weak are led away immediately and you never see them again. You don't need to ask where they've gone. The training is brutal from the outset. Not physically, at least not primarily, though there are elements of physical conditioning involved. No, the brutality is mental, psychic, designed to stress your abilities and your self-control to the breaking point and then beyond. You're taught to meditate, to build mental fortifications that can withstand psychic assault. The instructors don't explain these techniques gently or patiently. They show you once, then immediately attack your mind, battering at your defenses with psychic force, finding every weakness and exploiting it ruthlessly. If you fail, if your defenses crumble, you're left screaming on the floor while the lesson continues around you. The instructors step over your convulsing body without a second glance. Either you learn to strengthen your barriers or you don't survive the next assault. Simple as that. You learn quickly that the stakes are real. Several psykers in your group simply break during the first week. Their minds shatter under the relentless psychic pressure, leaving them as empty husks, drooling and unresponsive. The servitors come to take them away, and you never see them again either. More are possessed, losing the fight against the things that whisper in the warp, and these are executed immediately by the Sisters of Silence who stand eternal watch. Bolt rounds at close range, bodies destroyed before the possessing entities can fully manifest. The lessons are harsh, but they're effective. You feel your mental defenses strengthening, the walls around your consciousness becoming thicker, more resilient. The instructors teach you to recognize the signs of psychic intrusion, the subtle wrongness that indicates something is trying to get inside your head. You learn to identify the different flavors of chaos corruption, the burning rage of Khorne, the deceptive promises of Tze-Ench, the seductive corruption of Slaanesh, the decaying entropy of Nurgle. Each has a signature, a psychic scent that you're trained to recognize and recoil from. But recognition alone isn't enough. You're taught to fight back, to use your own psychic power as a weapon against the things that hunger for your soul. This is dangerous, infinitely dangerous, because using your powers means opening yourself to the warp, and opening yourself means inviting intrusion. It's a delicate balance, drawing enough power to be effective while maintaining enough control to avoid possession. Many fail this balance. You watch psyker after psyker lose control, their bodies consumed by weird fire or twisted by mutation, their screams echoing through the training halls as the Sisters of Silence rush in to end them. The instructors observe these failures clinically, making notes, discussing what went wrong as if the dying psyker were a failed experiment rather than a human being in agony. You suppose in a sense that's exactly what you are. The training expands beyond simple defense. You're taught to use your abilities constructively, to shape psychic energy into specific effects. telekinesis, telepathy, pyrokinesis, precognition. Whatever discipline your particular talents incline toward, the instructors nurture and develop it. But always with an emphasis on control. Power without control is worse than useless. It's actively dangerous. A pyrokinetic who can't regulate their flames is a liability. A telepath who can't shield their thoughts is vulnerable. A precognitive who can't distinguish true visions from warp-sent deceptions is a vector for corruption. Control is everything. Control is survival. You tattoo this lesson onto your consciousness through sheer repetition and consequence. Every loss of control, even minor, is punished immediately and severely. Sometimes the punishment is psychic, the instructors slamming your mental barriers with overwhelming force, showing you what happens when your defenses fail. Sometimes it's physical, beatings delivered by servitors programmed to strike with precisely calculated force. Enough to hurt, never enough to cause permanent damage that would reduce your value as a resource. And always there are the tests. The Scholastia Psychana is obsessed with testing, with measurement, with constant evaluation of every psycher's progress and potential. You're tested daily, sometimes multiple times per day, in a bewildering array of scenarios designed to assess your abilities and limitations. Can you maintain mental contact with another psyker across distance? Can you sense emotional states in normal humans? Can you detect lies? Can you manipulate probability to influence random events? Can you perceive possible futures? Can you defend yourself against psychic domination attempts? The tests grow progressively harder, pushing you further each time. What began as simple exercises, lift this object with your mind, sense what card I'm holding, evolve into complex challenges that demand everything you have. You're forced to use your powers while under psychic assault. You're required to maintain multiple mental disciplines simultaneously. You're put in situations designed to trigger fear, anger, or despair, emotions that weaken psychic discipline, and then tested to see if you can maintain control despite your emotional state. Some tests are explicitly designed to induce possession attempts. The instructors deliberately expose you to warp phenomena, carefully controlled but still terrifying, and observe how you respond. Can you recognize the threat? Can you defend yourself? Can you close the mental door before something gets through? The Sisters of Silence stand ready during these tests, their weapons trained on you, prepared to execute you instantly if you fail. The knowledge that you're one mistake away from death concentrates the mind wonderfully. You survive these tests. Not easily, not gracefully, but you survive. Your mental defenses prove adequate, your self-control sufficient, your raw power enough to be worth the continued investment of training. You're not the strongest in your group, but you're far from the weakest. You occupy the middle ground, competent but not exceptional, valuable but not precious. This, you learn, might be the safest place to be. The strongest psychers attract attention, both from the instructors who push them harder and from the things in the warp that hunger for powerful souls. Several of the most powerful psychers in your intake die or are consumed within the first month, their strength becoming their downfall. The weakest are culled regularly, sent away to join the daily sacrifices at the Golden Throne. But the middle, the competent and controlled, have the highest survival rate. You learn other things too beyond the formal curriculum. You learn which instructors are merely harsh and which are genuinely cruel, which to avoid when possible, and which might offer a scrap of genuine guidance. You learn to identify the psychers who are breaking, who won't make it through the next week. and you learn to distance yourself from them. Attachment is a liability when everyone around you is temporary. You learn to sleep despite the nightmares, to eat despite the fear nausea that's become your constant companion, to function despite the terrible knowledge of what awaits you at training's end, because they never let you forget what this is all for. The instructors remind you constantly that you're being trained for service, and that service has an expiration date. If you're lucky, very lucky, you might become an astropath, serving for decades before your life finally burns out. If you're strong enough, you might become a sanctioned psyker, attached to the Imperial Guard or the Inquisition, facing death in battle rather than consumption by the Emperor. If you're exceptional in very specific ways, you might be selected for the Grey Knights, or inducted into other specialized organizations, but most likely, most probably, you'll serve in the Astronomicon Choir. 2 to 3 months of service, burning your life away to maintain the beacon, then death and replacement by the next psyker in the endless line. This is the fate of the vast majority of psykers who survive the Scholastia's training. Not immediate consumption, but delayed consumption. Your death stretched out over weeks instead of occurring instantaneously. You try not to think about it too much. The knowledge is paralyzing if you let it be, a weight that makes every action feel meaningless. What's the point of learning, of training, of trying to survive, if the end result is always death? Why struggle when struggle only delays the inevitable? But you do struggle. You keep trying, keep learning, keep pushing yourself to meet the instructor's impossible standards. Maybe it's instinct, the human drive to survive overriding rational assessment of the situation. Maybe it's stubborn pride, a refusal to give up even when giving up would be easier. Maybe it's just that the alternative, accepting immediate death, allowing yourself to fail and be sent to the throne, is somehow worse than continuing to fight. The weeks blur together, each day a repetition of the last with minor variations. Train, test, sleep, repeat. The numbers in your intake group dwindle steadily. You started with several hundred. By the end of the first month, barely 100 remain. By the end of the second month, you're down to 50. Each loss is marked but not mourned. You can't afford mourning, can't spare the emotional energy for grief. You harden yourself, becoming colder, more distant, protecting what remains of your humanity behind walls that grow thicker with each passing day. And slowly, gradually, you begin to change. Not physically, though the constant stress and poor nutrition leave their marks on your body. No, the change is internal, psychic, and psychological. You're becoming what the Scholastia intends: a tool, a weapon, a controlled conduit for psychic power. The person you were before, that child or adolescent who first manifested powers on some distant world, is fading, buried beneath layers of training and trauma and terrible knowledge. You're not sure if what's replacing that person is better or worse, just different, harder, more capable, less human perhaps, and maybe that's necessary. Maybe becoming less human is the only way to survive what's required of you. The instructors watch this transformation with approval. They've seen it thousands of times before, the breaking down and rebuilding of psykers into something the Imperium can use. You're becoming predictable, controllable, reliable. You're becoming valuable. And value, in the Imperium, is the only thing that keeps you alive. As the training continues, as the tests grow ever more demanding, you hold on to one thought, one small glimmer of hope. Every day you survive is one more day of life. Every test you pass is proof that you're too valuable to throw away. Every moment of continued existence is a victory against the fate that awaits all psychers. It's not much, but in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, it's all you have. The final journey, approaching the Golden Throne. The day comes eventually, as you always knew it would. Despite your survival through months of training, despite proving yourself competent and controlled, despite every small victory and moment of continued existence, the day arrives when your training is declared complete and your fate is finally, irrevocably determined. You're not selected for the astropaths. That requires a very specific kind of psychic talent, a natural affinity for telepathy across vast distances, and while you're competent, you're not specialized. You're not assigned to the Imperial Guard as a sanctioned psyker. Your combat applications are limited, your discipline solid but not exceptional. You're not inducted into any of the specialized organizations that occasionally recruit from the Scholastia's graduates. Instead, you're selected for the Astronomican Choir. The announcement is delivered with administrative efficiency, no ceremony, no acknowledgement that this is a death sentence handed down with bureaucratic indifference. Your name appears on a list, displayed on a data slate held by an instructor who reads it without emotion or particular interest. You have one day to prepare yourself, to make peace with what's coming, and then you'll be taken to the forbidden fortress where the Astronomicon burns. One day. After all the weeks and months of training, all the struggle and suffering and small triumphs, it comes down to a single day of remaining life. Some psychers who receive this assignment break down immediately, years of repressed emotion finally overwhelming their defenses. They weep, they rage, they beg for mercy that won't come. The instructors watch these displays without sympathy. You've been trained for this, prepared for this, and failing to maintain composure now reflects poorly on the training itself. Those who break down completely are sedated and removed, their last day of consciousness taken from them. It's considered a mercy in its way. You don't break down. You've become too hardened for that. Your emotional responses too carefully controlled. You accept the assignment the way you've learned to accept everything in the Scholastia, with numb acknowledgement, filing it away as information to be processed but not dwelt upon. There will be time later for fear, for grief, for whatever final thoughts you allow yourself. Right now, you simply need to get through the next moments, then the next, until somehow the day has passed and it's time. But something happens that you don't expect. The instructor who delivered your assignment approaches you individually, which is unusual. Instructors typically maintain distance from the students, avoiding any personal connection that might interfere with their ability to deliver the brutal training the Scholastia demands. But this one looks at you directly, and for just a moment, you see something behind the professional mask. Weariness, perhaps, or empathy, carefully controlled but present. You've done well, the instructor says quietly. Your control is excellent. Your discipline admirable. In another life, in better circumstances, you would have made a fine astropath or perhaps even an inquisitorial psyker. But the Imperium's needs are what they are, and the choir requires constant replenishment. Your service will be invaluable. It's not much comfort, but it's more acknowledgement than you expected. More recognition of your individual existence than the Imperium usually provides. You nod, not trusting yourself to speak, and the instructor moves on to deliver other assignments to other psychers. The day passes in a strange state of heightened awareness and disconnection. You're intensely present in each moment, noticing details you'd normally overlook. the texture of your clothing, the taste of the final meal, the sound of other psychers breathing in the dormitory. But you're also distant, floating somewhere above yourself, observing your own actions as if you're watching someone else live through these final hours. You think about your life such as it was, your homeworld, already faded to vague impressions and fragmentary memories, your family, faces you can barely recall, the moment your powers manifested, the fear in everyone's eyes, the arrival of the black ships, the months aboard the transport, the arrival at Terra, the testing and training, all of it leading to this moment, this final day. Was there any point where it could have gone differently? Was there ever a chance, however slim, of a different fate? You don't think so. From the moment your psychic potential was written into your genes, this outcome was inevitable. You're a psyker, and psychers are fuel for the Imperium's great machine. That's all you've ever been, all you could ever be. The realization should be devastating, but you find yourself oddly calm. Maybe you're in shock. Maybe the training has successfully suppressed your ability to feel the full weight of your fate. Or maybe you've simply run out of fear, exhausted your capacity for terror over the long months of constant stress. Whatever the reason, you face the final hours with a strange serenity that you didn't expect. Other psychers selected for the choir spent their last day in different ways. Some pray endless litanies to the Emperor, begging for strength or mercy or meaning in what's to come. Some write messages that will never be delivered to families that have probably forgotten them. Some simply sit in silence, lost in thoughts that you can't fathom and don't try to intrude upon. Everyone faces death in their own way, and you respect that, even if you don't share their choices. Night falls, or what passes for night in the endless artificial cycle of the Imperial Palace. You lie in your bunk for the last time, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the dormitory around you. You don't sleep. You can't. This is your last night of consciousness, your last hours of being yourself, and you want to experience them fully, to hold on to awareness for as long as possible. And then it's morning, your last morning, and the guards come to collect you and the others selected for the choir. You're taken to preparation chambers, stripped and cleansed, your head shaven in accordance with the tradition of the Adeptus Astronomica. You're dressed in yellow robes, simple but clean, and a scarlet badge is affixed to your chest, the mark of the chosen, those deemed worthy to serve in humanity's greatest psychic endeavour. The irony of the title isn't lost on you. Chosen implies selection, honour, some kind of privilege. In reality, you've been sorted and allocated like any other resource, sent where the Imperium's needs dictate regardless of your own wishes or potential. But the rhetoric of service and sacrifice is important to the Imperium. The fiction that this is somehow voluntary, somehow noble. So you're chosen, and you wear the badge, and you keep your thoughts about the matter to yourself. Neural implants are installed, a quick surgical procedure performed by tech priests with mechanical efficiency. The implants burrow into your skull, extending tendrils into your brain, creating connections that will allow you to interface with the apparatus in the chamber of the Astronomicon. The procedure is painful despite the anesthetics, a deep ache that seems to resonate through your entire being, but it's over quickly, and then you're given time for the implants to integrate while the drugs wear off. You touch the implant ports on your skull, feeling the hard metal embedded in bone that was yours. You've been marked, physically altered, transformed from person to component. There's no going back now, even if there were somewhere to go back to. You belong to the Astronomicon body and soul, until there's nothing left of you to belong to anything. The other chosen are gathering, perhaps 50 or 60 psychers in total, all dressed in identical yellow robes, all bearing the scarlet badge, all facing the same fate. You recognize some from your training group, survivors of the months in the Scholastia. Others are unfamiliar, probably selected from different training cohorts, or brought directly from the initial evaluations if their talents were particularly suited to the choir's needs. An administrator of the Adeptus Astronomica addresses the assembled chosen. They speak of honour and duty, of the critical importance of the Astronomicon to humanity's survival, of the great privilege you've been granted to serve so directly in the Emperor's work. The speech is probably sincere in its way. Those who administer the Astronomicon truly believe in the necessity and nobility of what they do, but the words ring hollow when you're the one being consumed, when your death is the price of that necessity. Still, you listen. Not because you believe, necessarily, but because this is the final context for your existence, the meaning that the Imperium assigns to your sacrifice. You'll die maintaining the beacon that guides ships across the galaxy. Your life energy will be transmuted into the light that prevents the Imperium from fragmenting into isolated pockets. In dying, you'll enable survival for billions who'll never know your name or appreciate your sacrifice. It should matter. In a sense, it does matter, but mostly you just want it to be over. The march to the Forbidden Fortress begins. You're escorted by Adeptus Custodes, the Emperor's personal guardians, towering figures in golden armour that seems to glow with its own internal light. Their presence is overwhelming, a psychic weight that presses down on your consciousness. These are the Emperor's finest, gene-crafted warriors of supreme perfection, and being in their presence makes you acutely aware of your own insignificance. The route takes you deeper into the Imperial Palace, through corridors you've never seen before, past chambers whose purposes you can only guess at. The architecture becomes older the deeper you go, more ancient and strange, styles of construction from the age of technology, mixed with later imperial additions in a layered history written in stone and metal, and always, the Emperor's presence grows stronger. That golden psychic radiance intensifies with every step closer, until it's almost unbearable, a pressure that makes your eyes water and your skull ache. The Emperor is close now, so close, his vast consciousness pressing against reality like an ocean against a dam. You can feel his hunger, his desperate need, the endless consumption that keeps him anchored to existence. You're going to feed that hunger. Your soul is going to be added to the 10,000 years of souls already consumed. The thought should terrify you, and on some level it does, but you're beyond terror now, in some state that exists past fear where there's only acceptance. The procession enters the Forbidden Fortress, passing checkpoints manned by more custodes and by Sisters of Silence, whose blank presence provides momentary relief from the Emperor's overwhelming radiance. You glimpse other adepts going about their business, the administrative staff who manage the Astronomicon's operations, the instructors who train the Chosen, the tech priests who maintain the arcane machinery. All of them avoid looking at you directly. You're already dead in their eyes, already gone, and acknowledging your continued presence would only make their jobs harder. You descend through levels, down staircases and ramps that seem to go on forever, moving deeper into the heart of the fortress. The walls here are covered in psychic wards, layer upon layer of protection against the tremendous energies channeled through this place. You can feel the Astronomicon now, Not just the Emperor's presence, but the beacon itself, a blazing light that exists as much in the warp as in reality. And then you arrive at the chamber of the Astronomicon itself. The chamber is spherical, vast beyond comprehension, perhaps a kilometre in diameter. The walls are studded with machinery, arcane apparatus whose purposes you can't even begin to guess at. Cable bundles as thick as your body run across every surface, pulsing with barely contained energy. And at the chamber's focal point, suspended in the centre of the sphere, is the psychic battery. 10,000 chosen, locked into the apparatus, their consciousnesses linked and merged into a gestalt entity that generates the Astronomicon. You can see them, or rather you can see their bodies, withered and desiccated, looking more like corpses than living beings. But psychically they're blazing, a bonfire of souls burning in unison, their combined essence channeled and focused into the beacon that shines across the galaxy. This will be you. Very soon this will be you. Servitors approach, mechanical and uncaring, guiding you to an empty position in the apparatus. There are always empty positions, always spaces waiting for new chosen to fill as the old ones burn out and die. You're locked into place, restraints securing your limbs, cables connecting to your neural implants. The physical sensation is minimal, carefully designed to avoid discomfort that might interfere with psychic function. But the psychic sensation is overwhelming. The moment the apparatus activates, you feel your consciousness pulled away from your body, drawn into the gestalt. Your individual identity begins to dissolve, merging with the 10,000 other minds in the battery. You feel their thoughts, their emotions, their slowly fading sense of self. You feel the tremendous strain of maintaining the Astronomicon, the constant drain on every soul contributing to its light. And beyond that, through the beacon's blaze, you feel the Emperor. Not just his presence, but him, the vast and terrible consciousness that directs and shapes the Astronomicon. He is aware of you in some distant way, aware of every soul in the battery as components of his great work. There's no warmth in that awareness, no personal recognition. Your fuel, energy to be consumed, and he burns you without hesitation or remorse because that's what you're for. The golden light blazes brighter, and you begin to burn. Your life force pours out of you, transmuted into the psychic fire that powers the beacon. It doesn't hurt exactly, but you feel yourself diminishing, your soul being consumed moment by moment. Days pass, then weeks, time losing meaning as you exist in the eternal now of the apparatus. You are the Astronomicon. You are the light that guides ships home. You are the beacon in the darkness. And slowly, inexorably, you are dying, your essence burned away to maintain the fire. This is your fate. This is the end of your story. Not in a single moment of consumption, but in a slow fade, a gradual dissolution as everything you are is transformed into everything the Imperium needs. In the darkness between stars, ships see your light and navigate safely home. Billions live and die, entirely unaware that your sacrifice makes their lives possible. The Imperium endures one more day because you're here, burning, dying, serving, and that in the end is all any psyker can hope for. The Golden Throne, direct sacrifice to the Emperor. But let's step back for a moment. Not every psyker selected for consumption goes to the Astronomicon choir. Many, perhaps most, are taken directly to the Golden Throne itself, their souls fed immediately to the Emperor rather than being slowly burned away in the beacon's fire. This is the fate of the weak, the unsuitable, those whose psychic strength is insufficient for training, but whose souls still contain the energy the Emperor needs. Let's follow a different path. The path of those who fail the initial evaluations or who are judged too dangerous, too unstable, or simply too numerous for the training facilities to accommodate. Let's experience what it means to be taken directly before the God Emperor of mankind and consumed. The selection happens quickly, without ceremony. You're tested upon arrival at Terra, your psychic potential measured and evaluated, and the verdict is delivered with administrative efficiency, unsuitable for training. Your psychic strength is either too weak to justify the resources required to shape you into a useful tool, or perhaps there's some flaw in your character, some instability that makes you a poor candidate for the years of conditioning the Scholastia provides. Whatever the reason, you're classified as immediate consumption, added to the thousands who'll be fed to the Golden Throne today. You're not given time to process this. You're herded immediately into a different processing stream, moved with brutal efficiency through preparation chambers. The preparations are minimal. You're stripped, cleansed, dressed in simple white shifts that mark you as sacrifices. There are no implants, no training, no investment in your future because you have no future beyond the next few hours. The group around you is large, maybe 1,000 psychers or more, all facing the same fate. Some are children, barely old enough to understand what's happening. Some are elderly, their powers having manifested late in life, or having been hidden for years before discovery. Most are like you, adolescents or young adults, unremarkable except for the curse of psychic talent that's condemned you to this moment. The fear in the group is palpable, overwhelming. Without the months of training and conditioning that the Scholastia provides, these psychers have no defenses, no ability to mask or control their terror. The psychic miasma of fear is suffocating, a weight that presses down on everyone and feeds back into itself, amplifying with every mind that touches it. Some psychers are weeping uncontrollably, some are catatonic, shock having shut down all but their most basic functions. Some are praying desperate litanies to the very being who's about to consume them. You fall somewhere in the middle, neither broken nor accepting, just present in this terrible moment. You've known this was coming since your powers manifested, since the black ships collected you, since you felt the Emperor's hunger radiating from Terra. The only surprise is that there's no surprise that the reality matches your fears exactly. The Sisters of Silence are present as always, their blank auras providing the only control in a situation that could easily devolve into psychic chaos. With so many terrified psychers in close proximity, the danger of possession or uncontrolled psychic phenomena is extreme. The Sisters' presence suppresses that danger, forces everyone's powers into dormancy, though it does nothing to reduce the emotional terror that doesn't require psychic expression. You're marched deeper into the Imperial Palace, through corridors that grow progressively older and stranger. The architecture here predates the Imperium itself, remnants of the age of technology preserved and incorporated into the massive structure built around them. Some of the materials don't look like they should exist. Impossible alloys and crystalline structures that hurt to look at, suggesting technologies long lost to modern understanding, and the Emperor's presence grows stronger with every step. It's overwhelming now, a psychic pressure that feels like drowning, like being crushed, like burning alive. Even through the Sisters' nullification, even with your power suppressed, you can feel him. The master of mankind, the God Emperor, the dying golden god on his ancient throne, and he's so close now, so terribly, terribly close. Some psychers in the group collapse, their minds unable to process the proximity to such vast consciousness. The guards and servitors simply drag them along, unconcerned with consciousness or dignity. Whether you're awake or unconscious when you reach the throne makes no difference to the outcome. Your soul will be consumed either way. The procession descends through level after level, moving into the deepest parts of the Imperial Palace, into regions so heavily restricted that even most high-ranking officials never see them. This is the Imperial Dungeon, the heart of the Sanctum Imperialis, the chamber where the Emperor has sat upon the Golden Throne for 10,000 years. You're entering the holiest and most terrible place in the entire Imperium, and you're entering it to die. The final approach takes you through the Eternity Gate, that massive portal decorated with carvings depicting the Emperor's triumphs. 2 titans of the Legio Ignatum stand eternal guard, god machines whose very presence makes you feel like an insect, insignificant and easily crushed. The gate opens silently despite its tremendous size, well-maintained mechanisms operating with precision that speaks to 10 millennia of careful preservation. Beyond the gate is the approach to the throne room itself, a vast space with a ceiling lost in shadow far above. The walls are covered in the banners of every loyal Space Marine chapter, thousands of them, testaments to the Emperor's legacy and the armies that fight in his name. Under other circumstances it might be beautiful or inspiring. Now it's just another corridor leading to your death. The Adeptus Custodes are everywhere here, golden-armoured guardians standing watch at regular intervals, their presence both protective and ominous. These are the Emperor's personal protectors, warriors whose entire existence is dedicated to his defence, and they regard your procession with expressions hidden behind their helmets. You wonder what they think, watching the daily parade of sacrifices. Do they feel anything at all, or has duty hardened them beyond normal human emotion? And then you enter the throne room itself and all thought stops. The chamber is massive, a cathedral space that could hold entire armies. The air is thick with incense and ozone, and the walls pulse with barely contained energy, channeled through systems whose complexity you can't even begin to understand. Machinery fills every surface, arcane devices tended by tech priests who move in ritualized patterns that might be maintenance or might be prayer. The sound is overwhelming. The hum of power, the whisper of servitors, the chanting of attendants, the mechanical breathing of the Golden Throne itself. And at the center of it all, raised on a dais and surrounded by machinery, is the Emperor, the God Emperor of mankind, the master of humanity, your creator, your ruler, your God, and your doom. He's not what you expected. The propaganda depicts him as glorious, radiant, a being of perfect golden light. The reality is something else entirely, something that fills you with horror and awe in equal measure. The Emperor is dying, has been dying for 10,000 years. His body is a ravaged, skeletal thing, flesh burned away or rotted, bones visible through translucent skin that might be more scar tissue than anything organic. He's more corpse than living being, held together by the Golden Throne's arcane technology and by sheer psychic will. Life support systems are plugged directly into his body, tubes and cables carrying nutrients and medicines and who knows what else, desperate measures to sustain something that should have died millennia ago. But while his body is a ruin, his presence is overwhelming. The psychic radiance emanating from the throne is blinding, a golden light that exists as much in your mind as in objective reality. You can feel his consciousness, vast beyond comprehension, stretched thin across the entire galaxy, but still focused here, still present in some fundamental way. This is a being who holds reality together through sheer will, who fights endless wars in dimensions you can't perceive, who sustains the Astronomicon and holds closed the webway breach and protects humanity from threats that would drive you mad to fully understand. And he's hungry, so desperately, terribly hungry. The procession is brought to a halt at the base of the dais. The tech priests and attendants continue their work, moving around you with practiced efficiency. This is routine for them, something that happens every day, multiple times per day, a necessary feeding to sustain the being they serve. There's no ceremony here, no ritual beyond the bare minimum, your resources being consumed, nothing more. A tech priest approaches, carrying a device that might be a scanner or might be something else entirely. They pass it over each psyker in turn, making measurements, checking vitals, ensuring that each sacrifice is suitable for consumption. You suppose even souls have quality standards that must be met. When your turn comes, the device hovers before you, probing at your chest where your soul resides. The tech priest nods, satisfied, and makes a notation on their data slate. You're acceptable. Your soul contains the energy the Emperor needs, and you'll be consumed along with the rest. You want to feel something profound in this moment, some deep emotion commensurate with what's about to happen. Fear, certainly, but also maybe awe, or reverence, or even anger. But mostly you just feel numb, your capacity for emotion exhausted by the long journey here and the overwhelming presence of the Emperor. You're a shell going through the motions, present but not truly conscious, experiencing this but not fully processing it. The consumption begins with no warning, no dramatic announcement. One moment you're standing at the base of the dais, and the next moment you feel something grab your soul. Not a physical sensation, your body remains standing undamaged, but a psychic hook, the Emperor's consciousness reaching out and taking hold of your essential self. The pull is irresistible. You feel your soul beginning to separate from your body, drawn toward the throne like metal to a magnet. It doesn't hurt exactly, but there's a wrongness to it, a fundamental violation of what you are. Your soul is meant to be yours, bound to your body, not separate, not floating free, not pulled towards something else. You try to resist, instinctive and futile. Your consciousness strains against the pull, trying to hold onto your body, onto your identity, onto existence itself. But you might as well try to resist gravity or the passage of time. The Emperor's need is absolute, and what he needs, he takes. There's no malice in it, no cruelty, just hunger and necessity. He's dying, and you're food, and he consumes you as naturally as breathing. Your soul tears free, and suddenly you're floating, disconnected from your body but still aware. You can see yourself standing below, your physical form now empty, a shell that will collapse in moments once the last spark of life fades. Around you, 1,000 other souls are similarly floating, all being drawn toward the throne, all consumed in this same moment. These souls merge as they approach the Emperor, individual identities dissolving into a river of psychic energy that flows into the golden throne. You feel yourself losing coherence, your memories and personality and everything that made you who you were beginning to fragment and disperse. There's no pain in this dissolution, just a gradual fading, like falling asleep, like slipping into darkness. But before consciousness fades completely, you touch the Emperor's mind. Just for an instant, just a brush against that vast consciousness, and in that instant you understand. The Emperor is fighting a war that never ends. He's holding back tides of demons that press against the webway breach. He's sustaining the Astronomicon, pouring energy into the beacon that must never falter. He's extending his will across the galaxy, lending strength to his servants, turning aside chaos incursions, protecting humanity from threats that exist in dimensions beyond normal perception. He's doing all of this simultaneously, constantly, without rest or respite for 10,000 years, and he's losing. Slowly, incrementally, he's losing ground. His power diminishes with each passing year, his hold on reality growing weaker. The daily sacrifice of psychers gives him enough strength to continue, to hold his positions, but not to advance, not to win. He's locked in a stalemate with forces that want nothing more than humanity's extinction, and the only thing preventing complete collapse is the constant feeding of souls. Your soul, thousands of others, every day for 10,000 years. It's all that stands between humanity and the abyss. In that instant of understanding, you feel something that might be the Emperor's acknowledgement. Not gratitude exactly, not personal recognition, just a sense of purpose, of your death having meaning, of your sacrifice enabling survival for billions who'll never know your name. It's not comfort, but it's something, a context for your ending that's larger than yourself, and then even that fades. Your consciousness dissolves completely, your soul consumed and converted into the energy the Emperor needs. You cease to exist as an individual, your essence added to the vast reservoir of power that sustains the master of mankind. You are gone, erased, as thoroughly deleted as if you'd never existed at all. Your body collapses at the base of the dais, joining 1,000 others. Servitors will collect the corpses shortly, processing them into something useful because the Imperium wastes nothing. But you're not there anymore. You're not anywhere. You're simply gone. Fuel burned to keep the Imperium's greatest fire burning one more day. This is the fate of thousands of psychers every single day. This is the price of the Imperium's survival. This is what it means to be sacrificed to the Emperor. And tomorrow, another black ship will arrive, carrying more psychers, more fuel for the fires. The cycle never ends, can never end, because the moment it stops is the moment the Emperor dies and the Imperium falls. In the darkness of the throne room, surrounded by machinery and watched by the custodes, the Emperor sits upon the golden throne and continues his endless vigil. He has consumed you and forgotten you in the same instant, because you are never more than a single drop in an ocean of sacrifice. But that drop mattered. Your death, meaningless to you, means survival for countless others. It's a terrible bargain, but it's the only one the Imperium has. And so the sacrifice continues day after day, year after year, millennium after millennium, an unbroken chain of souls offered up to sustain a dying god. This is the Imperium of Man. This is the grim darkness of the far future. This is what it means to be a psyker in the 41st millennium. Paths not taken. The alternative fates of Imperial psychers. Not every psyker ends in immediate consumption or service in the Astronomicon choir. While these represent the fate of the vast majority, there are other paths, other purposes to which psychers might be put. Let's explore these alternatives, these different ways that the Imperium utilizes those cursed with psychic abilities. Because understanding what you might have become, what you might have been if circumstances were different, adds another layer to the tragedy of what actually happens. The most common alternative fate is becoming an astropath, an interstellar telepath whose abilities enable communication across the vast distances of the Imperium. Astropaths are absolutely essential to Imperial function. Without them, there would be no way for Terra to communicate with frontier worlds, no way for military commands to coordinate across sectors, no way for the vast bureaucratic machinery of the Administratum to maintain any kind of coherent policy across 1,000,000 worlds. But becoming an astropath requires surviving the soul-binding ritual, and that's something very few psykers manage. Soul-binding is a ritual performed in an arena before the Eternity Gate, in the direct presence of the Emperor himself. Selected psykers, those judged to have the right combination of telepathic talent and strength of character, are brought before the Golden Throne. But instead of having their souls consumed, something different happens. The Emperor reaches out and touches their consciousness, transferring a small portion of his own essence into their souls. The experience is described as traumatic beyond words. The Emperor's consciousness is so vast, so overwhelming, that even the briefest contact is almost too much for a human mind to endure. Psykers who survive the ritual are forever changed, marked by the experience in ways both physical and psychic. Almost all of them are left blind, their optical nerves burned out by the golden radiance of the Emperor's presence. But in exchange, they gain a measure of his protection, a sliver of his power woven into their souls that helps ward against demonic possession and chaos corruption. Many psykers don't survive soul binding. Their minds shatter under the strain, leaving them as vegetables or driving them instantly mad. Their bodies might survive, but the person inside is gone, destroyed by contact with something too vast to comprehend. These failures are added to the daily sacrifice, their broken souls still useful for feeding the Golden Throne, even if they can no longer serve as astropaths. Those who do survive emerge transformed. They're blind, yes, but they perceive reality in different ways, their psychic senses compensating for the loss of physical sight. They can see souls, perceive emotions, detect psychic phenomena invisible to normal humans, and their telepathic abilities are vastly enhanced, capable of sending messages across star systems through the warp to other astropaths who receive and relay them in a galaxy-spanning network of psychic communication. An astropath's life is one of service, certainly, but it's service with a measure of dignity and value that direct sacrifice doesn't offer. They serve on ships, facilitating communication between vessels and worlds. They staff communication stations throughout the Imperium, maintaining the invisible web of messages that keep civilization functioning. They're respected to a degree, their blindness and psychic talent marking them as having survived something that most can't, as bearing the Emperor's touch directly, but it's not a comfortable existence. Astropaths live with constant psychic sensitivity, feeling every emotion of everyone around them, detecting the currents and eddies of the warp that normal humans are blissfully unaware of. They know the dangers lurking just beyond reality, the things that want to break through, the eternal vigilance required to keep those things at bay. And they're always aware that their protection, that sliver of the Emperor's essence in their souls, is finite. It can be worn down, eroded by constant exposure to the warp, and when it finally fails, they're as vulnerable as any other psyker to possession and corruption. Most astropaths serve for decades before dying, either from natural causes accelerated by constant psychic strain, or from catastrophic possession that requires their immediate execution. It's a longer life than the acquire offers, certainly much longer than immediate sacrifice. but it's still a life lived in service to the Imperium, your own wishes and desires subordinated entirely to the needs of the great machine. Another alternative fate is becoming a sanctioned psyker, a combat-trained psyker attached to the Imperial Guard or occasionally to inquisitorial retinues. These psykers have passed through the Scholastia Psychoner's training and been judged suitable for direct warfare applications. Their abilities might include pyrokinesis for combat, telepathy for intelligence gathering, precognition for tactical advantage, or any number of other disciplines useful on the battlefield. Sanctioned psykers are feared even by their own side. The Imperial Guardsmen who fight alongside them call them bolt magnets, a grimly humorous acknowledgement that enemy fire tends to focus on the obvious psyker before targeting anyone else. They're also constantly monitored for signs of corruption or possession, every sanctioned psyker shadowed by commissars and officers ready to execute them at the first hint of demonic influence. The life expectancy of a combat psyker is measured in battles, not years, and most die in terrible ways, possessed and executed, consumed by their own uncontrolled powers, or simply killed by enemy action like any other soldier. But at least they die doing something, affecting the world directly rather than being consumed passively. There's a certain grim satisfaction in that, in knowing that your death in battle might tip the scales, might achieve some tactical objective, might save your comrades even as it ends your own existence. It's still service, still sacrifice, but it's active rather than passive, a choice to fight rather than simply accepting consumption. Wordven psykers are a subspecies of sanctioned psykers, weaker individuals who can't control their powers well enough to serve individually. They're formed into squads, their abilities linked and channeled through a leader psyker who directs their combined output. It's a way of making use of psykers who'd otherwise be too unstable or weak to serve, aggregating their strength into something combat effective. The downside is that Wordvane psykers are even more expendable than regular sanctioned psykers, treated as barely a step above servitors, their lives valued only for some momentary tactical advantage they might provide. The very strongest psykers, those rare individuals classified as Alpha or Alpha Plus, might be recruited into even more specialized roles. The Inquisition takes some, training them as interrogators or full inquisitors, agents with tremendous autonomy and authority to root out heresy and corruption wherever they find it. These psykers live dangerous lives, constantly exposed to the very chaos influences they're meant to fight, walking a razor's edge between using their powers to serve the Emperor and falling to the very corruption they oppose. Space Marine librarians represent another fate for exceptional psykers discovered young. If a child with psychic abilities is identified early enough and shows the right genetic markers, they might be recruited into a Space Marine chapter and trained as a librarian. These are warrior scholars, combining psychic abilities with the enhanced combat prowess of the Adeptus Astartes. Librarians are respected within their chapters, valued for their wisdom and their powers, though always watched carefully for signs of corruption. The life of a librarian is one of constant warfare, certainly, but also one of honor and brotherhood, belonging to something larger than yourself. Librarians serve for centuries, their extended lifespans as Space Marines giving them time to master their abilities and accumulate tremendous knowledge. It's probably the best fate a psyker can hope for in the Imperium, combining usefulness with respect, danger with purpose, service with dignity. But librarian positions are rare, available only to those discovered at exactly the right age with exactly the right characteristics, and even then only if they survived the brutal transformation into Space Marines. For every psyker who becomes a librarian, thousands are consumed or put to other uses. It's an option that exists more in theory than in practice for most. The Grey Knights represent an even more rarefied fate. This is the Chamber Militant of the Order Malleus, Space Marines dedicated specifically to fighting demons. All Grey Knights are psykers, selected from infancy and subjected to the most intensive training and conditioning imaginable. They're perhaps the only psykers in the entire Imperium who are truly trusted, their minds fortified against chaos to a degree that makes possession nearly impossible. But the Grey Knights recruit maybe a handful of psykers per year from across the entire galaxy. The standards are so high, the requirements so specific, that most psykers will never even be considered, let alone selected. It's not really an option for anyone reading this. Not really a fate you could aspire to. It exists as a theoretical alternative, proof that psykers can be more than fuel or disposable soldiers, but practically speaking, you'll never be a Grey Knight. There are other, even more obscure fates. Some psykers are recruited into the various ordos of the Inquisition for specialized purposes. Some become advisors to rogue traders, using their abilities to aid exploration and trade in distant regions. Some are assigned to the Adeptus Mechanicus for research purposes, their abilities studied in attempts to understand the nature of the warp and psychic phenomena. Some are even turned into servitors, their psychic abilities somehow preserved and harnessed while their consciousness is destroyed, creating living tools that combine machine efficiency with psychic sensitivity. And then there are the psykers who fall through the cracks entirely, who somehow evade detection and live their entire lives without being collected by the black ships. On some worlds, particularly those far from Imperial oversight, or those with particularly incompetent or corrupt authorities, psykers might live for years or even decades using their abilities in secret. Some become criminals, using their powers for theft or coercion. Some become local healers or fortune tellers, providing services that make them valuable enough to their communities that people look the other way. Some simply hide their abilities as thoroughly as possible, living in constant fear of discovery, but preferring that fear to the certainty of what happens if they're caught. These unsanctioned psykers are technically heretics. The Imperium requires that all psykers be registered, collected, and either trained or sacrificed. Using psychic abilities without authorization is a crime punishable by death, and harboring an unsanctioned psyker is equally illegal. But the Imperium is vast and enforcement is imperfect, and so some slip through, living lives that are free but forever tainted by the knowledge of what they are and what would happen if they were discovered. But these alternatives, all of them, represent deviations from the norm. They're exceptional cases, rare outcomes that most psykers will never experience. The overwhelming majority of psykers are either consumed immediately upon arrival at Terra or trained briefly before being assigned to the Astronomicon Choir. That's the reality, the statistical truth that drowns out all the exceptional cases. You could have been an astropath if your telepathic abilities were stronger and you survived soul binding. You could have been a sanctioned psyker if your combat applications were more obvious and you were willing to die on some distant battlefield. You could have been a librarian if you'd been discovered as a child and shown the right genetic markers and survived the transformation into a space marine. You could have been any number of things in theory if circumstances had been just slightly different, but circumstances weren't different. You're here, now, facing the fate that most psykers face, and knowing about the alternatives doesn't change that. doesn't offer comfort or hope. It just adds another layer of tragedy, another aspect of what might have been if the galaxy were a kinder place. The Imperium sought psykers according to utility and necessity, allocating them where they're needed most. And the greatest need, the most urgent requirement, is always for fuel. Souls to burn in the Astronomicon, souls to feed the Golden Throne, souls to sustain the dying Emperor and the great works he maintains. That need dwarfs all others, consuming the vast majority of all psykers collected across the Imperium. You were never really going to be anything else. The alternatives exist, but they weren't for you. Your fate was determined by factors beyond your control. Your level of psychic strength, your particular talents, the Imperium's needs at the moment you were processed, pure chance. And those factors led you here, to consumption and sacrifice, to becoming fuel rather than tool. It's not fair. But fairness is not a concept the Imperium recognizes. There's only necessity, only service, only the cold mathematics of survival that determine every psyker's fate. And yours was determined long before you ever had a chance to influence it. The Imperial Creed, how the Imperium justifies the sacrifice. We need to talk about how the Imperium justifies all of this. How does a civilization built on human sacrifice, consuming thousands of its own citizens every single day, maintain any pretense of morality or righteousness? How do the priests of the ecclesiarchy preach about the Emperor's benevolence while presiding over the systematic execution of psykers? How do the administrators who manage this vast apparatus of death sleep at night, knowing what they're complicit in? The answer is the Imperial Creed, the religious and philosophical framework that shapes how the Imperium understands itself and its actions. And at the heart of that framework is a simple, terrible truth. Necessity justifies everything. The Imperium exists in a state of permanent crisis. This isn't hyperbole or exaggeration. It's the fundamental reality of human existence in the 41st millennium. Humanity is surrounded by enemies, internal and external, that want nothing more than its complete extinction. The forces of chaos press constantly against the barriers of reality, seeking to break through and consume all life. Xenos species like the Orcs, the Tyranids, and the Necrons wage perpetual war against human worlds. Heretics and traitors undermine the Imperium from within, corruption spreading like a cancer through the body politic. In this environment, survival is not guaranteed. It's not even likely. The Imperium persists through constant grinding effort, a war machine that can never stop moving because the moment it does is the moment it's overrun. Every resource must be exploited, every advantage seized, every sacrifice made, because the alternative is extinction. Not defeat, not subjugation, but total annihilation of the human species. This is the context in which psyker sacrifice is understood. Yes, it's terrible. Yes, it's tragic. Yes, it costs millions of lives across the span of millennia, but it's necessary. Without the Astronomicon, the Imperium fragments and falls. Without the Emperor sustained on the Golden Throne, the webway breach opens and terror is destroyed. Without the constant feeding of psyker souls, humanity loses its greatest protector, and the forces of chaos sweep across the galaxy unopposed. Put in those terms, the sacrifice of psykers becomes not just acceptable, but imperative. It's the price of survival, a cost that must be paid because the alternative is unthinkable. The Imperium doesn't sacrifice psykers because it's cruel or because it enjoys killing. It does so because the survival of trillions depends on those sacrifices, because the mathematics of survival demand it. The ecclesiarchy, the official church of the Imperium, has built an entire theological framework around this necessity. According to imperial doctrine, the Emperor is a living god, the master of mankind, worthy of worship and absolute obedience. He sacrificed himself to protect humanity, allowing his body to be broken and imprisoned on the golden throne so that his spirit could continue the great work of safeguarding the human species. He endures 10,000 years of agony out of love for his children, suffering eternally so that they might live. In this framework, psykers who are sacrificed are participating in the Emperor's own sacrifice. They're joining their suffering to his, adding their strength to his eternal vigil. It's portrayed as a privilege, an honor, the highest service a psyker can provide. They die so that the Emperor might live, and the Emperor lives so that humanity might survive. Their individual deaths are tragic, yes, but they're also holy, sanctified by the purpose they serve. The propaganda is ubiquitous and relentless. From childhood, imperial citizens are taught that the Emperor protects, that he watches over humanity from the golden throne, that every breath they take is made possible by his sacrifice and the sacrifices of those who serve him. Prayers are offered daily to the God Emperor, thanking him for his protection, begging for his continued blessing, pledging loyalty and service unto death, and psykers are taught that they're special, chosen by fate to serve the Emperor directly. The black ships are portrayed not as prison transports, but as sacred vessels, collecting those blessed with abilities that make them valuable to the Imperium. The journey to Terra is framed as a pilgrimage, a holy expedition to the throne world where one might serve the Emperor himself. The sacrifice is reframed as apotheosis, becoming one with the God Emperor, your soul merging with his in a way that transcends individual existence. Does anyone actually believe this? That's a more complicated question than it might seem. The priests of the ecclesiarchy certainly believe, or at least most of them do. They've been indoctrinated from youth, trained in seminaries where the imperial creed is absolute truth, shaped by years of ritual and repetition until belief becomes reflexive. They preach the necessity of psyker sacrifice with genuine conviction, seeing it as a holy duty, a sacred requirement that maintains the Emperor's protection over humanity. To them, questioning the sacrifice would be like questioning whether air is necessary for breathing. It's so fundamental to how the Imperium functions that doubting it is almost impossible. The administrators who manage the logistics of psyker collection and sacrifice are more pragmatic. They understand the numbers, the cold mathematics of how many psykers are needed to sustain the Astronomicon and the Golden Throne. They know that the Imperium would collapse without these sacrifices, that the entire edifice of human civilization depends on this constant feeding of souls. Their belief, if it can be called that, is rooted in necessity rather than faith. They don't sacrifice psykers because they think it's holy. They do it because it's required, because the alternative is extinction. The psykers themselves have the most complicated relationship with the imperial creed. On one hand, they've been raised in imperial society, subjected to the same propaganda as everyone else, taught from childhood to revere the Emperor and accept the necessity of service. On the other hand, they're the ones actually being sacrificed, and it's much harder to embrace a doctrine that demands your death. Some psykers accept their fate with genuine religious fervour. They've internalized the ecclesiarchy's teachings completely, believing that their sacrifice is holy, that dying to sustain the Emperor is the highest purpose they could serve. These are the psykers who go to their deaths willingly, even eagerly, convinced that they're joining with the God Emperor in a way that transcends individual mortality. Their faith is real, powerful enough to override the natural human instinct for survival. Others accept their fate with resignation rather than enthusiasm. They don't necessarily believe the religious rhetoric, but they recognize the necessity. The Imperium needs their sacrifice, and refusal isn't an option, so they go to their deaths not because they think it's holy, but because they understand it's inevitable. There's a kind of nobility in this acceptance, a refusal to make their last moments about pointless resistance or denial. And some psychers reject the Imperial Creed entirely, seeing it as propaganda designed to make acceptable something that's fundamentally wrong. They're being killed, their lives ended prematurely, and no amount of religious framing can make that anything other than murder. These psychers might rage against their fate, might try to escape or resist, though such attempts are always futile. The Imperium's mechanisms for collecting and sacrificing psychers are too well established, too thoroughly enforced to be evaded through individual resistance. The question of whether the sacrifice is morally justified is one that the Imperium doesn't really engage with. Morality, in the Imperial framework, is determined by necessity. What must be done is right because it must be done. The survival of the species justifies any action, any cost, any sacrifice. Individuals don't matter except as components of the greater whole, and if those components must be destroyed to maintain the whole, then destruction is not just acceptable but obligatory. This is utilitarian ethics taken to a horrifying extreme, the greatest good for the greatest number applied with absolute ruthlessness. The trillions of humans living across 1 million worlds outweigh the millions of psychers sacrificed across millennia. The continuation of human civilization justifies the extinction of any number of individuals. It's cold, brutal, inhuman in its calculation, but it's also internally consistent and, by its own logic, correct. The Imperium doesn't pretend that psyker sacrifice is pleasant or desirable. It acknowledges the tragedy openly, incorporates it into the religious framework as part of the Emperor's own suffering. The God Emperor suffers on the Golden Throne, and psychers suffer in being sacrificed to him, and both forms of suffering are necessary for humanity's survival. It's a grim theology, offering no comfort and little hope, but it's honest about what the Imperium is and what it demands, and in a galaxy as hostile as the one humanity inhabits, that honesty might be the only real virtue the Imperium can claim. It doesn't lie about the cost of survival. It doesn't pretend that the sacrifices required are anything other than terrible. It simply insists that they're necessary, that the alternative is worse, and that therefore the sacrifices must continue regardless of how anyone feels about them. There are those, within and without the Imperium, who question whether this is really true. Is the Emperor's continued existence actually necessary for humanity's survival? Could the Imperium function without the Astronomicon, perhaps reverting to slower, more localized forms of FTL travel? Could the webway breach be sealed through some other means? Are there alternatives to the current system that wouldn't require the daily sacrifice of thousands? These questions are considered heretical, dangerous, not to be spoken aloud. The Imperium's doctrine is that the current system is necessary, that no alternatives exist, that even questioning the necessity is a form of betrayal. Whether this is actually true or whether it's simply what the Imperium has convinced itself of is unclear. The current system has functioned for 10,000 years, which is powerful evidence for its necessity. But it's also possible that the Imperium has become so invested in this system so dependent on it, that even considering alternatives is too threatening to be permitted. The truth is that no one knows. The Emperor himself, the only being who might actually understand all the variables, all the necessities, all the alternatives, is beyond communication. He sits on the golden throne, his consciousness stretched across the galaxy, engaged in battles that no one else can perceive, let alone understand. If he has opinions about the daily sacrifice of psykers, if he regrets the necessity or wishes there were another way, he's not sharing those thoughts with anyone. So the Imperium continues as it has for 10 millennia, collecting psykers, bringing them to Terra, sorting them into their various fates, and ultimately consuming them in service to the God Emperor. It justifies this through necessity, through theology, through the simple assertion that this is how things must be. And because questioning the system is heresy, because doubt is treated as betrayal, the system perpetuates itself, each generation accepting what the previous generation established as unchangeable truth. You, as a psyker facing sacrifice, are caught in this machine. You can believe the Imperial Creed, accepting that your death serves a holy purpose and provides meaning beyond your individual existence. You can accept the necessity pragmatically, understanding that your sacrifice is required for the Imperium's survival, even if you don't find that particularly comforting. Or you can reject the whole framework, seeing yourself as a victim of a system that's too vast and too entrenched to be changed or escaped. None of these perspectives change what happens. You're sacrificed regardless of what you believe, regardless of whether you think it's justified, regardless of your acceptance or resistance. The Imperium's need for psyker souls is constant and implacable, and your individual thoughts about that need are ultimately irrelevant. But perhaps there's something in choosing how you face this fate, in determining for yourself what it means even if you can't determine whether it happens. The Imperium can take your life, can consume your soul, can erase your existence. But it can't, quite, force you to believe that this is right, that this is good, that this is anything other than what it is, a terrible necessity in a terrible galaxy where humanity clings to survival by any means available. And maybe that small rebellion, that mental reservation, is the only freedom you have left. Conclusion, the endless cycle. We've reached the end of this dark journey, this exploration of what it means to be sacrificed to the Emperor in Warhammer 40,000. We've followed the path from awakening as a psyker, through capture by the Black Ships, arrival at Terra, the brutal training of the Scholastia Psychoner, and finally to the various fates that await: consumption by the Golden Throne, service in the Astronomicon Choir, or the rare alternatives that might delay but never ultimately prevent your death in the Emperor's service. It's a grim story, isn't it? There's no happy ending here, no escape, no redemption that doesn't involve your death. If you're a psyker in the Imperium of Man, your fate is sealed from the moment your abilities manifest. You will serve, and you will die in that service, and your death will barely be noticed by the vast machine of the Imperium that consumes you. You're a statistic, a resource, a component to be used and discarded, but your story, terrible as it is just one among millions. Every day the cycle repeats. Every day Black Ships arrive at Terra carrying thousands of psykers collected from across the galaxy. Every day those psykers are tested, sorted, allocated to their various purposes. Every day thousands are consumed, their souls burned away to sustain the Emperor and the Astronomicon. And every day the Black Ships depart again, returning to their endless circuits through the Imperium to collect more psykers, more fuel for the fires. This has been happening for 10,000 years. 10,000 years of unbroken sacrifice, an endless chain of souls offered up to maintain the Imperium's survival. The numbers become almost meaningless at that scale. Millions of psykers sacrificed, maybe billions across the full span of millennia. Each one was a person, someone with thoughts and feelings and a life that mattered, at least to them. Each one died far from home, consumed by forces they could barely understand, in service to an empire that saw them as nothing more than necessary fuel. And it will continue. As long as the Imperium exists, as long as the Emperor sits upon the golden throne, as long as the Astronomicon must burn, psykers will be collected and consumed. The cycle is self-perpetuating, built into the fundamental structure of how the Imperium functions. It can't stop without everything else stopping too, without the entire edifice of human civilization collapsing into fragments. This is the grim darkness of the far future made tangible, made personal. The Imperium is a civilization built on suffering, sustained by sacrifice, maintained through the systematic exploitation of its own citizens. It's not evil exactly, because that would imply some kind of choice, some alternative path it could take. It's simply necessary, driven by the cold equations of survival in a galaxy that offers no mercy and no respite. And the terrible thing is that it might actually be necessary. The threats the Imperium faces are real, existential, capable of ending humanity entirely if they're not opposed constantly and with every resource available. The forces of chaos aren't metaphorical. They're real entities that want to consume all life, to drag reality itself into the warp and reshape it according to their insane, malevolent designs. The Tyranids are a galaxy-devouring swarm that sees all life as nothing but biomass to be consumed. The Necrons are ancient machines that remember when they ruled the galaxy and want to reclaim what they see as rightfully theirs, regardless of how many upstart organics must be exterminated in the process. Against threats of that magnitude, the sacrifice of psykers might genuinely be the minimum price of survival. It might be that the Imperium, for all its cruelty and inhumanity, is actually doing the least terrible thing available to it. The alternative, allowing the Emperor to die and the Astronomicon to go dark, might genuinely result in human extinction within a few generations, or it might not. Maybe there are other ways, other possibilities that the Imperium is too rigid and too fearful to explore. Maybe the sacrifice of psykers has become habit rather than necessity, a system that perpetuates itself because no one in power has the courage or the vision to imagine alternatives. Maybe humanity has trapped itself in a nightmare of its own making, and the bars of the cage are psychological rather than physical. We can't know for certain. The information isn't available, and the Imperium doesn't encourage that kind of speculation. What we can know is what happens, the reality of psyker sacrifice as it exists in the 41st millennium, and that reality is terrible. A machinery of death that grinds on relentlessly, consuming lives to maintain itself. If there's any comfort to be found in this story, it might be in the simple fact that individual deaths, while tragic, contribute to something larger. Every psyker sacrifice does help sustain the Astronomicon, does help keep the Emperor anchored to reality, does help protect the trillions of humans living across the Imperium who would otherwise be exposed to horrors they couldn't survive. It's cold comfort, certainly, but it's something. Your death matters, not personally but functionally, as part of the great machine that keeps humanity alive. And maybe that's all any of us can hope for in the end, psyker or not. To matter in some way, to contribute something to the continuation of life, even if that contribution costs us everything. In the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war and suffering and the constant threat of extinction, maybe the best we can do is accept our role in the great struggle and find what meaning we can in service. Or maybe that's just more propaganda, another way the Imperium justifies the unjustifiable. Maybe individual lives should matter more than they do, and maybe the system that reduces people to resources is fundamentally wrong, regardless of how necessary it claims to be. These are questions with no clear answers, moral ambiguities that the Imperium resolves through dogma, but that remain unresolved for anyone willing to think critically about them. We've explored the darkness of psycho-sacrifice as thoroughly as we can, from discovery to death, from individual experience to systemic justification. We've seen what it costs, who it costs, and what the Imperium gains from that cost. We've considered the alternatives, the paths not taken, the rare exceptions that only highlight how terrible the standard fate is, and now we've reached the end. Not the end of the story, because the story never ends. The cycle continues, eternal and inexorable, black ships collecting psychers across the galaxy, terror consuming souls to sustain its dying god, the Astronomicon burning bright to guide ships through the darkness. But the end of our exploration, our deep dive into one of the Imperium's darkest necessities. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the grim darkness of the far future. I hope you found it informative, even if it wasn't particularly comforting. That's the nature of Warhammer 40,000 after all, a setting that doesn't offer easy answers or happy endings, that forces us to confront terrible questions about survival and sacrifice and the price of civilization. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Warhammer lore, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel. I create content like this regularly, exploring the dark corners of the 41st millennium, examining the lore that makes this setting so compelling and so horrifying. Your support helps me continue creating these long-form, in-depth explorations, and I'm genuinely grateful for every single person who takes the time to listen. Drop a comment below letting me know what you thought of this particular topic. Was it too dark? Not dark enough? Are there other aspects of psycho life in the Imperium you'd like me to explore in future videos? I read every comment and they often inspire future content, so don't hesitate to share your thoughts. And once again, I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Building this community of Warhammer lore enthusiasts from around the world is one of my favourite parts of creating this content, and I'm always curious about who's out there listening to these tales of the Imperium. Until next